I've always believed that the wilderness tests you in ways the highways never will. Out on the open road, with other travelers in sight, fuel stations glowing like lighthouses, and cell signal keeping the illusion of safety in your pocket, you think you understand freedom. But it's only when you push farther, when you turn down that last dirt road, when the washboard gravel rattles every dish in your cabinets, when the trees swallow your rear view until the road behind feels erased, that's when you really find out what you're made of. RV boondocking, true off-grid camping in the remote wild, has a way of stripping a person down. It doesn't ask politely, it takes. It measures how far you'll bend before you break. I'd told myself I was ready. I'd stocked my Volkswagen camper with water, fuel, and food. I'd checked every seal, every latch, every emergency kit. I thought preparedness was the same as safety, but nothing in my tidy bins and boxes prepared me for what the wilderness was about to teach me. The first night seemed almost peaceful. I'd parked along a forgotten service road where the land rolled into an endless stretch of pines. The stillness pressed close, a thick, suffocating kind of quiet. I lit a small fire, its crackle barely enough to fill the void. The air was sharp with pine resin and the faint tang of metal from my stove. I told myself that the silence was beautiful, cleansing, but deep down a nervous thread began to pull at me, because silence that thick isn't natural. Wilderness hums, owls call, branches whisper, insects trill. That first night it was as though the forest held its breath. I lay in my camper van. The fire burned low outside, and I couldn't sleep. Every sound I did hear felt amplified. The creak of the van frame as it cooled, the tick of my watch on the nightstand, even the pulse in my ears. Then faintly came something else. A soft drag like fabric brushing over gravel. Not loud, not steady, just there. My breath caught. I reminded myself, animals wander, winds shift. But when the sound repeated, closer this time, my rational mind cracked. I stared at the thin metal wall of my van, imagining shapes just inches away, pacing. I forced myself to unzip the side window. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the deep musk of wet soil. My flashlight beam cut across the pines, bouncing off bark and vanishing into black. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. I closed the zipper, lay back down, and told myself I'd imagined it. Yet for the rest of the night, every flicker of shadow felt like a step, every gust of wind a whisper. Morning brought relief, but not clarity. I circled the van, half expecting footprints. The ground was littered with needles, soft enough to swallow any trace. I brewed coffee, trying to chase off the unease, but the bitterness tasted flat, metallic. I reminded myself I was out here for this. For the test, the solitude, the sharpening of instincts dulled by city life. And yet, the wilderness had already found a way under my skin. By the second night, the wind carried voices. At least, that's what it sounded like. When the gusts pushed through the trees, they didn't moan or whistle as they should. They rose and fell in tones too deliberate, too human. I strained my ears, heart racing. My mind clawed for reason. Air currents, acoustic tricks, like maybe the canyon carrying sound from miles away. But the cadence was wrong. It paused, it returned, it almost formed words, and each time my name seemed threaded through the gust, faint but undeniable. Sleep came in jagged pieces. I dreamed of people outside my van, faces pressed to the glass, their mouths moving soundlessly while the wind carried their words. I woke drenched in sweat, fumbling for the lantern, my breath steaming in the cold air. Nothing there, no faces, just the endless forest watching back. That morning, I considered leaving. Rationality whispered that it was fine, just nerves playing tricks in the silence. But another voice inside me, the stubborn one, refused to let fear send me running. I told myself that survival wasn't about avoiding fear, but learning to live with it. Still, I couldn't shake the weight in my chest, the feeling that I'd been marked the moment I'd parked here. The third day brought another lesson. How quickly confidence shatters when the basics fail. My solar panel, carefully positioned, had slipped in the night, tilted just enough to starve the battery. My fridge hummed low, food warming inside. I checked my backup power system. Fine for now. But a thought burrowed in. What if everything failed? No electricity, no refrigeration, no light when the night voices rose again. I pictured myself alone, deep in the woods, darkness pressing until it was solid. That thought gnawed at me all day as I rationed the sun, praying for enough charge to last through the night. And the night was worse. I'd lit a fire again, trying to create a bubble of safety. But flames attract eyes. Out in the black, beyond the fire's glow, shapes moved. I couldn't see them directly, but I felt them. Figures darting just beyond vision, slipping between trunks, circling. I gripped my flashlight so tightly the plastic creaked. Every crack of a twig sent adrenaline flooding through me. At one point, I thought I saw two faint pinpricks of light hovering between the trees, low to the ground like eyes reflecting. When I blinked, they were gone. I told myself it was deer. Always deer. But deer don't whisper in the wind. They don't linger silent all night. They don't wait. By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed me out. My reflection in the van's tiny mirror startled me. Sunken eyes, skin pale, lips cracked from the dry cold. I realized then that survival wasn't just about gear or food. It was about willpower, about holding your mind together when everything around you tried to unravel it. That's the part no manual tells you. Out here, the wilderness doesn't just test your body, it claws at your sanity. And that was only the beginning. By the fourth night, my nerves were no longer frayed. They were raw, like exposed wires sparking at every brush of wind. The day had passed with little more than maintenance, adjusting the solar panel, checking water stores, walking a short loop around the site just to feel the earth under my boots. Yet even in daylight, I felt watched. The forest was too still, too expectant. Birds wheeled overhead, but few landed near. Squirrels I would have expected to chatter among the branches stayed silent. It was as though something larger had claimed the space and everything smaller obeyed its presence. That night, I cooked over a low flame, hoping to keep my fire small enough not to draw attention. I ate mechanically, every bite tasting like ash. As I cleaned the pan, I froze. Across the dirt where the firelight faded into shadow, I thought I saw depressions in the pine needles, round, irregular, as though something heavy had pressed down and then lifted away. I crouched closer. My headlamp beam caught the impressions. Not boots, not paws, not hooves. Just shapes, like a dragging, shuffled step. They led away into the trees, fading where the ground swallowed them. A thought burrowed deep. What if I wasn't the first to camp here? What if others had stood exactly where I stood, stared at these same marks, and left them behind when they wandered off into the dark, never to come back? My chest tightened. I forced myself upright, muttering under my breath that it didn't matter, that I wasn't about to invent ghosts out of footprints. Still, I noticed how quickly my breath came, how the forest seemed to lean closer, as if listening. I climbed into the van early, locking the doors, pulling the curtains tight. I left the lantern on longer than usual, bathing the cramped space in artificial warmth. My books and notes lay untouched on the table. I couldn't focus on anything but the sounds outside. Around midnight, the wind rose again. At first, it carried the same shifting cadence I'd heard before, that eerie suggestion of voices. But then something changed. Between the gusts, between the silences, I heard another rhythm, a faint knock like wood against wood. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. My throat went dry. I told myself branches clattering. Nothing more. But when the knock repeated, steady, measured, and closer each time, denial cracked. That was no accident of the wind. That was intent. I sat frozen, ears straining. My pulse throbbed in my jaw, drowning out everything else. Then it came again, not outside, but against the van itself, a hollow rap near the back panel. 3 sharp knocks, slow and deliberate. My stomach dropped. I reached for the flashlight, but my hands trembled so badly I dropped it onto the floor. The knock didn't come again. I waited, lungs barely moving, eyes fixed on the wall as though staring could hold it shut. Minutes stretched into an eternity before I dared to move, before I dared to breathe again. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat upright, flashlight in hand, until dawn's gray seeped through the curtains. When I finally stepped outside, my boots crunching in the frost, I circled the van. Nothing. No footprints, no scuffs against the metal, no sign of contact. My rational brain screamed at me to accept the evidence. There was nothing there. But my instincts, the older, deeper part of me, knew the absence of evidence meant nothing. Whatever had touched my van hadn't left a trace because it hadn't wanted to. By now, fear had seeped into every corner of me. And fear changes the way you move, the way you think. I noticed myself checking the locks 3 times instead of once, hoarding water even though I had plenty, scanning the tree line each time I stepped out. Survival became less about comfort and more about vigilance. Every second was spent preparing for something I couldn't name but felt certain was coming. On the 5th day, I decided to push farther into the forest. Maybe if I understood the land better, I'd calm myself. I followed the faint depressions I'd seen earlier, the shuffled marks in the pine needles. The deeper I went, the colder it grew. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The air grew heavy, stale, as if no wind had passed here in weeks. My boots scuffed through layers of needles, damp with a sour smell, earthy and faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The trail ended in a small clearing where the trees bent inward, forming a warped circle overhead. In the center, a heap of stones rose like a cairn, roughly stacked. On top lay something pale, a strip of fabric, torn and weathered, stained with rust-dark blotches. My throat clenched. It looked too much like a shirt sleeve. I didn't touch it. I didn't even step closer. The message was clear. This was not a place meant for me. I backed out slowly, the silence pressing harder with every step. When I finally returned to my campsite, I felt hollow, like I'd left something of myself behind in that clearing. And the forest seemed to know it. The air felt charged now, electric, every breath catching in my chest. That night, the whispers in the wind sharpened. I could no longer pretend they were random tones. They shaped syllables, hesitant, stilted. At one point, I swear I heard my name again, drawn out as if through teeth. Daniel. The way it rasped through the dark made my stomach twist. No one alive calls a name like that. I sat with my lantern burning bright. But light doesn't protect you from sound. It doesn't stop the way your imagination fills the black beyond the glass with shapes. Every time the whisper shifted, I pictured a figure just outside, leaning close, lips at the seam of the van's window. My grip on the flashlight left grooves in my palm. I told myself I'd leave at first light, no matter how stubborn my pride was. I wasn't proving anything by staying. But when morning came, my engine coughed once and died. Panic set in quick, bitter and hot. I tried again. The starter whined, caught and failed. I checked the battery, fine. Fuel, plenty. No reason it shouldn't run, but it didn't, as though the wilderness had decided my trial wasn't finished yet, as though leaving wasn't an option it was willing to give me. My van, my lifeline, sat dead in the silence, and for the first time I truly felt trapped. That night was the longest of my life. The forest didn't hold its breath anymore. It exhaled. The wind rose and fell, carrying voices clearer than ever. The knocks returned, circling the van, tapping in patterns that felt deliberate. I pressed my hands to my ears, but sound isn't something you can shut out. It gets inside you. My mind raced with images of hands I couldn't see, of figures pressed against the thin walls. I knew if I opened the curtains, I'd see them. And that thought alone kept me paralyzed, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself just to hear my own voice against the tide. I realized then what true survival was. Not fire, not water, not food. It was holding on when your own mind threatened to tear you apart. Out here, the wilderness doesn't kill you quickly. It waits. It unravels you thread by thread until you're nothing but fear in a human shape. By the 6th night, I was already past exhaustion. Sleep had become a rumor, a memory of something I once trusted but no longer had the luxury to claim. My body ached from tension, from hours of sitting upright with a flashlight gripped like a weapon. My mind circled in endless spirals, trying to explain the unexplainable, trying to rationalize what I knew was beyond reason. But the wilderness doesn't wait for clarity. It presses until you break. The day had passed in a blur. I'd spent hours with the van's engine, checking every line, every fuse, every connection I could reach with my limited tools. Nothing was wrong, nothing obvious, yet the key only brought silence. When I finally slammed the hood shut, the sound echoed through the trees like a gunshot. And in that echo, I swore I heard something respond, a faint, distant call that rose and fell like laughter muffled in the wind. My stomach dropped. I told myself I was imagining it, but imagination doesn't leave you shaking with cold sweat in broad daylight. I rationed food carefully now, not because I was out, but because I didn't know how long I'd be trapped here. Each bite of bread felt dry as dust in my mouth. Each swallow scraped like glass. I drank sparingly from my water tank, telling myself I needed to conserve, though another part of me whispered that no amount of rationing mattered if I didn't survive the nights. As dusk bled across the sky, I felt the dread rise with it. The shadows stretched long and thin, reaching toward the van like claws. My firewood pile was dwindling, but I forced myself to light a blaze anyway. The glow flickered weakly against the encroaching dark. I kept my back to the van, staring outward, trying to meet the forest head-on. But every rustle, every crack of twig set my nerves on fire. I found myself whispering aloud just to hear a human voice, even if it was only my own. Stay calm. Stay focused. You've got this. You've got this. But my voice trembled, betraying me. And then it began. The knocking, at first distant, barely audible, wood against wood, slow and deliberate. My chest tightened. I clenched my fists, waiting. The knocks drew closer, circling, measured. Then came another sound, a dragging scrape, like something heavy pulled across the forest floor. It moved in uneven bursts, pause, then drag again, edging closer. My pulse thundered in my ears. I swung my flashlight beam wildly, cutting across trunks and brush, but nothing revealed itself. Just the void, swallowing my light whole. I retreated into the van, slamming the door, locking it twice over. My breath came fast, shallow, my ribs straining. I killed the lantern to hide my position, but darkness inside was no safer. The van's thin shell might as well have been paper against the weight of the night. The knocking came again, this time directly against the side panel. 3 sharp raps, deliberate, mocking. I clapped my hands over my ears, teeth clenched so tight they ached, but the knocks grew louder, multiplied, front, back, both sides. They surrounded me, a chorus of hollow fists against thin walls. Each strike reverberated through my bones until I wanted to scream, just to release the pressure. And then, silence, sudden, crushing. More terrifying than the knocks themselves. I sat frozen, waiting, every muscle screaming to flee, though I had nowhere to go. In that silence, something pressed against the van. The metal groaned faintly as though weight leaned against it. Slowly, impossibly slow, I heard the scrape of fingers, or something like fingers, trailing along the side. The sound crawled from the back window, across the door, pausing just beside my head. My breath stopped. My body went cold. And then, clear as a whisper in my ear, came a voice through the thin wall. Open. I snapped, scrambling backward, knocking over my lantern, my heart slamming so hard I thought it would tear from my chest. No! I shouted, my own voice raw and alien, in the dark. The sound seemed to scatter the silence for a moment, but when it fell again, the weight against the van was gone. The forest swallowed everything back into itself. I don't remember the rest of that night. Time dissolved into fragments of terror, of whispers rising and falling, of knocks returning in irregular bursts until I couldn't distinguish dream from reality. At some point, I must have collapsed, because dawn found me curled on the floor, flashlight dead in my hand, throat raw as though I'd been screaming. My body felt drained as though something had siphoned the strength from me. That morning, desperation overtook fear. I gathered my pack, food, water, the essentials, and told myself I'd hike out. The forest couldn't stretch forever. I'd find a road, another camper, anyone. The first mile went quickly enough, my boots crunching the frost, my breath steady in the cold air. But as the hours wore on, unease returned. Landmarks repeated. A fallen log I'd stepped over before, a crooked pine with lightning scars across its trunk. I circled, though I'd sworn I'd been moving straight. The compass in my hand spun sluggishly, as if unsure of its duty. By afternoon, the realization struck like ice in my gut. I wasn't getting out. The forest wasn't letting me. I staggered back into camp near dusk, more shaken than when I'd left. My van sat waiting, cold and inert, as if mocking my attempt. I collapsed inside, chest heaving, the weight of defeat heavier than hunger or thirst. Survival manuals don't prepare you for this. For the moment when the wilderness doesn't just surround you but owns you, when it bends your path, scrambles your sense of direction, holds you captive. Night fell, and with it, the panic became unbearable. The knocking didn't wait this time. It began as soon as the light bled from the sky, hammering the van from all sides. I screamed, pounded back, begged it to stop. My fists left dents in the thin metal. The forest didn't care. The knocks grew faster, overlapping, until the van thrummed with their rhythm. I pressed my palms to my ears, tears streaking my face, rocking in place like a child. My voice cracked as I shouted, "What do you want from me?" And for the first time, the forest answered, not with words, but with a sound like laughter, low and cruel, carried on the wind. That was when I broke. Panic swallowed everything. I tore open the van door, stumbling into the night, flashlight beam trembling across the trees. "I'm not afraid of you," I screamed, though every nerve in my body screamed the opposite. My breath billowed in clouds, my heart a runaway hammer. The forest absorbed my voice, swallowed it whole. And then in the shifting shadows, I saw them. Shapes. Dozens, maybe more. Not solid, not clear, but moving. Slipping between trunks, leaning from behind branches, circling just beyond the edge of the light. Their eyes glinted faintly, low to the ground, too many, too close. My chest seized, the flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness slammed over me like a lid. And in that suffocating black, the voices rose all at once, whispering in unison, a tide of sound that filled the air until it was impossible to breathe. I don't remember how long I stood in that blackness, every muscle locked in terror, the voices rising around me like a tide that wouldn't stop climbing. My knees trembled, my lungs seized, and I thought for certain I'd collapse there in the dirt and let the forest take me. But somewhere inside, something primal clawed against the panic, survival, stubborn and raw. It wasn't courage, it wasn't strength, it was the refusal to be erased. I bolted back toward the van, hands outstretched, praying I wouldn't trip on roots I couldn't see. The voices followed, hissing, snapping, their cadence fractured like broken speech. My fingers scraped cold metal, and I hauled myself inside, slamming the door shut. I locked it twice, 3 times, my chest heaving as if I'd run miles. For a moment, I just sat there in the dark, forehead pressed to the window, knowing that nothing I did inside those thin walls could keep the wilderness out if it truly wanted in. Then, against all reason, the engine turned. I hadn't touched the key. I hadn't even been near it. The van trembled, dashboard lights flickering alive, the low rumble vibrating up through the floor. My breath caught in my throat. It felt wrong, like the machine itself wasn't responding to me, but something outside. Still, I knew this was my only chance, my only escape. My hands shook so hard I barely got the key into the ignition, but when I twisted, the van roared fully awake. Headlights cut through the black like twin spears. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw them. Figures frozen in the beams, thin, elongated, their heads cocked at angles too sharp to belong to anything human. Eyes reflecting flat silver. And then they scattered, melting back into the dark as if the light itself had seared them. My foot slammed the pedal, gravel spitting behind me as the van lurched forward. The forest closed in, trunks whipping past on either side. The road ahead was little more than a suggestion, a pale scar of dirt and frost. I didn't care. I drove as if the earth itself was collapsing behind me. The knocks didn't stop. Even as I sped down the road, something hammered against the panels, rattling the cabinets, shaking the frame. My teeth clenched, tears blurred my vision. I whispered through gritted teeth, "Hold together. Hold together." Not sure if I meant the van or myself. Every turn felt endless, the road looping back on itself, the same crooked pine flashing in my headlights again and again. It was as though the forest twisted space, refusing to release me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. If I was trapped in a loop, I'd drive it until the wheels shredded. Anything but stopping. Anything but giving in. Minutes, maybe hours, bled together. Then suddenly the trees thinned. The air shifted. I burst onto a wider stretch of gravel, the kind carved by service trucks years ago. The road looked straight, honest, unbroken. I pressed harder, the van rattling like it might shake apart. In the rearview mirror, the darkness pooled thick behind me, as if it had form, as if it lingered at the edge of the tree line waiting for me to falter. The knocks faded, the voices thinned, dissolving into the wind. For the first time in days, silence felt real. Not forced, not sinister, just empty. My chest heaved, my throat raw. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. The road spat me out onto a cracked asphalt stretch where a battered highway sign leaned crooked against the weeds. I don't remember what number it bore, only the overwhelming relief that numbers meant civilization, meant maps, meant something outside the wilderness. I drove until dawn painted the horizon in bruised shades of purple and gold. Only then did I pull over at a rest stop, collapsing against the wheel. My hands were bloodied from gripping metal and wood, my knuckles raw. My reflection in the rear view startled me. Eyes sunken, skin pale, face streaked with dirt and sweat. I looked like a man who'd been lost for months, not days. And yet, I was alive. Alive when every part of me had believed I wouldn't be. I stepped out into the morning air, legs trembling beneath me. The scent of asphalt and exhaust mingled with pine from the distant hills, grounding me in a way I'd never known before. The world felt real again. But the forest hadn't let me go clean. In the silence between cars passing on the highway, I swore I could still hear it. Faint, far away, a whisper trailing my name on the wind. I closed my eyes, swallowing the rising panic. Maybe it was just memory, just trauma echoing in my skull. Or maybe some things don't let go once they've found you. Maybe wilderness doesn't just test you, it marks you. Either way, I'd escaped. For now. And sometimes, survival isn't about conquering the wilderness. It's about living to carry the scar. I stayed at that rest stop for hours, slumped in the driver's seat, too afraid to sleep, too drained to move. Truckers came and went, engines groaning, brakes hissing, men with tired eyes climbing down to stretch their legs. I watched them with a kind of detached awe, marveling at how ordinary they looked, how untouched. Not one of them seemed to sense the weight I carried, the way the wilderness still clung to me like a second skin. They chatted on phones, bought coffee from vending machines, and went on their way. Meanwhile, every gust of wind through the rest stop's cracked windows made me flinch. Every shadow beneath a passing rig sent my heart sprinting. When I finally worked up the nerve to ask one of the drivers where we were, my voice cracked like I'd forgotten how to speak. He frowned, gave me the name of the county and the nearest town. His answer barely registered. What mattered was that I was back. There were roads here, lights, voices that didn't vanish when you turned your head. Civilization. But I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel saved. That night, parked in a lit lot beside a gas station, I realized something. The true wilderness doesn't stop at the tree line. Once it's inside you, it comes with you, waiting in the quiet. I lay awake in my van, neon buzzing through the curtains. Still, my body expected the knocks. My ears strained for whispers. I found myself clenching the blanket in my fists, certain I'd feel weight pressing against the van again. Nothing came. But the fear didn't leave. It had become a part of me. I drove for days after that, avoiding forest roads, hugging highways like lifelines. Each mile put distance between me and that place, yet distance didn't dull the memory. If anything, it sharpened it. I thought about the cairn of stones I'd seen, the fabric atop it, stained with what I refused to confirm. I thought about the footprints, the laughter on the wind, the voice rasping my name through thin metal. I thought about the engine coming to life without my hand. None of it belonged to reason. And yet, it had happened. To me. The more I tried to rationalize, the clearer one truth became. Preparedness alone won't save you out there. I'd thought I was ready, gear stocked, tools sharp, every precaution in place. But survival is more than checklists. Survival is facing what you cannot explain, what you cannot fight, and refusing to collapse beneath it. Out in the true wild, the enemy isn't only hunger or cold or thirst. Sometimes it's the silence. Sometimes it's the voices you hear in that silence. Sometimes it's yourself, unraveling thread by thread. Weeks passed before I could sleep without the lantern burning. Even now, I find myself double-checking locks, rationing supplies I don't need to ration, scanning tree lines even on well-traveled roads. I've become someone who listens differently, who feels the air shift before the wind arrives, who knows that silence has flavors and meanings. Someone who has learned the hard way that wilderness isn't empty. It's alive. And sometimes it watches. Would I go boondocking again? People ask me that. They expect me to say no, to admit I've been scared off for good. But the truth is more complicated. The wilderness nearly broke me. Yes, it marked me. But it also stripped me bare and showed me the raw core of who I am when nothing else stands between me and the dark. And maybe that's why we go out there at all. Not for beauty, not for freedom, but for confrontation with nature, with fear, with the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. Still, I can't shake the sense that something followed me. A presence that lingers just beyond sight, waiting in the corners of quiet rooms, humming in the background when the wind slides through power lines. It hasn't knocked again. It hasn't whispered my name since. But sometimes when I wake at 3 a.m. and the world is still, I feel that same pressure in my chest, that same weight in the air as though the wilderness hasn't finished with me yet. And maybe it hasn't. Maybe survival isn't a moment you achieve and then move on. Maybe it's a thread you hold on to every single day, a pact you make with yourself to keep walking, keep breathing, even when the night leans close and asks you to stop. That's what I've learned from RV boondocking, from facing the remote wilderness in its rawest, most merciless form. The greatest danger isn't the cold or the hunger or the broken engine. The greatest danger is forgetting that you matter enough to fight. Out there, you either cling to that truth or you vanish. So if you ever find yourself drawn to the back roads, tempted by the promise of silence and solitude, remember this: the wilderness doesn't care about you. It doesn't hate you, doesn't love you. It simply waits. And in that waiting, it will test you. Prepare your gear, yes. But more than that, prepare your mind. Because the true trial won't come from what you can see. It will come from what you feel pressing in when the world goes quiet. I escaped, but escape doesn't mean victory. Escape means you live to carry the weight. And some nights when I close my eyes, I still hear the faintest echo of knocks against thin metal, like a reminder, a warning. Survival isn't an ending. It's a debt you pay over and over until the wilderness decides it's finished with you. And I know, deep down, it isn't finished with me yet. The first thing I noticed when I turned off the last paved road was the silence. It wasn't the ordinary hush of nature, but a thick, pressing stillness that made the engine noise of my RV feel intrusive, almost disrespectful. I had come here looking for solitude, for a place to rest my mind, but as the gravel road narrowed and the trees grew denser, I began to feel like I was intruding into something that had been sealed away for centuries. The sign that finally appeared, faded white paint on weather-beaten wood, read Maple Ridge Lodge, 14 miles. 14 miles on a road no wider than a driveway, rutted and climbing into mountains where radio signals couldn't follow. I told myself that was exactly what I wanted. Remoteness. But some small rational corner of my mind whispered that remoteness comes with a cost. The forest around me was the kind of dense you only see in old logging country. Pines so tightly packed their branches knitted overhead, blocking out patches of sky. The further I drove, the darker it became, until my headlights looked weak against the shadowed corridor. My hands were clamped tight on the steering wheel, my chest tight with the sense that I wasn't just driving into mountains, but into some place time had forgotten. I cracked the window for fresh air and was greeted not by the crisp mountain chill I expected, but by a smell, wet, earthy, almost metallic, as though the soil had been turned up freshly everywhere at once. The road wound around a ridge, exposing flashes of valleys far below, then dove back into trees again. I was 34 years old, with enough camping experience behind me to know better than to ignore my instincts. And yet I kept dismissing them, as though denial could smooth the rising unease in my chest. I told myself I was tired, that the forest was playing tricks, that the strange unease was just nerves. I remembered my sister's words when I left Flagstaff a week ago. Just don't disappear off the map, okay? At least text me once in a while. I promised I would. But promises don't mean much when there's no signal, and I already knew that even if something went wrong, no one would hear from me. When the lodge finally came into view, it startled me. It appeared almost suddenly at a bend in the road, set back on a clearing surrounded by pines. It was a sprawling log structure, older than I expected, with a steep roof and dark timbers that looked damp even though the sun was still high. A stone chimney reached toward the sky like a monument. The gravel parking lot held only 2 vehicles, an old pickup and a Jeep with Montana plates. I parked the RV off to the side and stepped out, stretching my legs. The air was colder here, sharper, and I realized I hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. Inside, the lodge was dim, the kind of dim that belongs to places that don't bother competing with daylight. A woman in her 60s appeared from behind a desk, her hair gray and tied back, her smile small but steady. She introduced herself as Helen, the owner. Her voice was gentle, though there was something measured in the way she spoke, as if she weighed every word before letting it out. She didn't seem surprised to see me, though when I mentioned that I planned to park my RV out back and camp alone for a few nights, her smile faltered. "Most folks just stay in the lodge," she said. "It gets quiet out there." She held my gaze a beat longer than necessary before sliding the guest book toward me. The guest book itself was old, leather-bound, the pages yellowing. I flipped it open and was surprised by the gaps. Names and dates from the 1980s, then nothing for long stretches, then a few entries in the 2000s, entire months with no signatures. I scrawled my name anyway, feeling a ripple of unease as the pen scratched the page. Helen gave me directions to where I could park, out past a stand of birch trees near a creek. As I turned to leave, I thought I saw her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place, pity, or maybe warning. The site she'd pointed me to was beautiful, almost too perfect. The creek ran slow and cold, the birches gleamed white in the fading light, and the ground was level enough that I didn't have to fuss with stabilizers. I set up, pulled out a chair, and let the quiet sink in. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It pressed against me, the way silence sometimes feels heavier than noise. Every time the wind stirred the leaves, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder. My mind kept trying to fill the silence with shapes and sounds that weren't there. By the time darkness fell, I was exhausted from bracing against nothing. That night, I woke abruptly at 2 a.m., the kind of waking that feels less like sleep ending and more like something outside pulling you into awareness. My first thought was that someone had knocked on the RV's side panel. Not a crash, not a bump from a falling branch, but a deliberate knock. I lay still, my heart hammering, listening. The forest was silent, save for the faint trickle of the creek. I told myself it was nothing, a dream, nerves. Yet I couldn't shake the certainty of it, that solid, hollow sound reverberating through metal. I stayed awake until the first light seeped through the blinds. In the morning, I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself I'd imagined it. I made coffee, walked along the creek, and took photos of mossy stones and the way sunlight angled through the birches. But as I walked back, I noticed something that drained the warmth from me. On the dirt near my RV, just below the driver's side door, was a mark. It wasn't a boot print. It wasn't an animal track either. It was circular, pressed into the soil as though something round and heavy had rested there. A ring, almost perfect, maybe 6 inches across. I bent down, touched it, felt the damp earth crumble against my fingers. My stomach turned. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of erosion, but I couldn't bring myself to park my chair outside that day. By the second night, I was already debating whether to move into the lodge. But pride is a stubborn thing, and solitude was the reason I had come. I stayed put. That evening, as the last light drained from the ridge, I heard it again. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, against the side of my RV. This time I didn't pretend to sleep. I grabbed my flashlight, yanked open the door, and shone the beam into the night. The forest stared back, unmoving, as though it had been waiting for me to look. Nothing stirred, no footsteps retreating, no movement at all. Just the cold press of silence, thicker than ever, wrapping me in dread I couldn't laugh off anymore. I didn't sleep after that second knocking. I sat in the driver's seat of my RV, flashlight in one hand, coffee in the other, staring through the windshield like a sentry. The night outside was absolute. No moon, no stars, just black treetops pressing against blacker sky. The creek's trickle was the only sound, but even that seemed to fade sometimes, swallowed up by the hush of the forest. Around 3 a.m., I began to hear something else, soft, irregular creaks, like the weight of someone shifting on old wood. It wasn't near the RV, not close enough to make me panic, but it came from the direction of the birch grove. It would groan once, then go still, then groan again, as if the trees themselves were straining under a burden I couldn't see. My imagination ran wild. A hunter's tree stand left to rot, a cabin foundation hidden by undergrowth, or worse, someone sitting out there in the dark, watching me with all the patience in the world. When dawn finally broke, it came slowly, as though the sun itself was reluctant to touch this place. I stepped outside, exhausted but restless, searching for some explanation. The birches were the same as yesterday, white, straight, clean against the darker woods. But at the base of one trunk, I noticed a patch of earth that looked disturbed. Kneeling, I brushed aside the wet leaves. The soil was loose, black, and underneath it was a hint of something unnatural, the edge of a board, rotting and splintered. I pulled at it until a plank came free, revealing more wood beneath, like flooring. The smell that rushed up was awful, damp and sour, the kind of smell that clings in your nostrils. I dropped the board and backed away, heart thudding. A buried structure? An old shack collapsed under decades of growth? Or a grave? My mind latched onto that word before I could stop it. The rest of the morning, I tried to convince myself I hadn't really seen what I thought I had. I brewed another pot of coffee, ate quickly, and debated my next move. Rationally, I knew I should leave. Drive back down the road, find a spot closer to town, tell myself the solitude experiment was over. But stubbornness rooted me there. I told myself I was imagining things, letting isolation get the better of me. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of Helen's faltering smile when I said I'd camp out back, as though she knew something I didn't. I decided to walk back up toward the lodge, partly to clear my head, partly to feel less alone. The path wound through the birches, then into pines where the air grew cooler. Halfway up, I found something that stopped me cold, another ring pressed into the dirt, identical to the one I'd found near my RV, perfectly circular, about 6 inches across, as though something heavy and round had rested there. My stomach tightened. I scanned the ground, but no other marks led away from it, no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. Just that perfect ring sitting in the soil like a signature. When I reached the lodge, the parking lot was emptier than before. The Jeep was gone. The pickup sat alone, its bed filled with rusted tools and a cooler. Inside, the main room was empty except for Helen, who was wiping down the counter. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Sleep all right?" she asked. Her voice was casual, but I thought I heard something beneath it. I hesitated, then told her about the knocking, about the marks in the dirt. She paused, cloth in her hand, then shook her head. "You've been out here a long time by yourself, haven't you?" she said gently. "Sometimes the forest plays tricks." I wanted to press her to demand answers, but the way she said it, calm, final, shut me down. She offered me a room in the lodge again, said I'd be warmer and more comfortable there. I considered it, but something in me rebelled against the idea. Moving inside felt like admitting I was afraid, like giving up. I told her I'd stick it out. Her eyes lingered on me as I left, soft but heavy, like she was watching a man walking willingly into danger. Back at the RV, I couldn't relax. Every sound made me twitch. The creak of branches in the wind, the trickle of water, even my own footsteps on the gravel, all of it sounded amplified, intentional. By late afternoon, I realized I'd been pacing circles around my campsite for an hour without noticing. That's when I saw it, another ring in the dirt, this time right by the creek. Fresh, damp, so cleanly pressed it might have appeared minutes ago. That night, the knocking returned. Louder, sharper, 3 distinct raps on the metal paneling. I froze in my bed, heart racing, breath held. Then silence. I waited, muscles aching with tension, until another set came, this time on the opposite side of the RV. 3 raps. Steady, deliberate. My skin prickled with the certainty that whatever was out there wasn't testing the vehicle, it was testing me. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, flung the door open, and stormed outside, light beam slicing across the trees. Who's there? My voice cracked in the cold air. The forest held its breath. No movement. No retreating footsteps. Just that heavy, oppressive silence, as if the whole mountain were listening. I circled the RV, shining the beam low to the ground. The dirt was marked again, but not just with circles. There were smudges now, shallow grooves leading toward the birch grove, disappearing into the dark. My mouth went dry. I knew, without knowing how, that if I followed those grooves, I wouldn't like where they led. I retreated into the RV and locked the door, though the lock felt meaningless against whatever was out there. My hands shook as I pulled the blinds shut, heart hammering as I imagined eyes just beyond the glass. I sat in the dark, gripping the flashlight, waiting for more knocks. They never came. But as I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I swore I heard it again. That slow, irregular creaking from the birches, like weight shifting on unseen beams. When morning came, the marks in the dirt were gone. The soil looked untouched, smooth, as though nothing had pressed it at all. I stood there staring, mind spinning. Either I was losing my grip, or something wanted me to doubt myself. And doubt is dangerous out here, in a place where no one would find me if I didn't drive back down. I considered packing up right then. But instead, I found myself walking back to the birches, back to the disturbed patch of earth where I'd uncovered the rotting boards. My hands moved before my brain caught up, clawing at the soil, pulling away leaves and splinters. Beneath the boards was a hollow space, a cavity in the ground. The smell was worse this time, sickly sweet, rot mingled with rust. I gagged, covered my mouth, but leaned closer anyway. Inside, half buried in dirt and leaves, was something pale, something shaped like a hand. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own boots, heart slamming against my ribs. My throat was tight, my stomach twisting. I couldn't tell if it was truly a hand or just a trick of light and soil and fear. But I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever was buried there wasn't meant to be disturbed, and yet I had disturbed it. I backed away from the hollow, stumbling through the undergrowth until the birches gave way to the clearing where my RV sat. My breath came ragged, visible in the cold air, though it wasn't cold enough for it to frost like that. My mind spun with excuses. Maybe it wasn't a hand, maybe it was a root, a stone, some pale animal bone caught in the soil. But none of those explanations matched the shape I had seen. The way the fingers curled slightly inward, as though still clinging to the earth. I forced myself inside the RV and locked the door. My reflection in the window glass looked ashen, eyes wide, face drawn thin with fear I hadn't wanted to admit. I poured water into a pot and tried to make tea, something to ground me, but my hands shook so badly I spilled half of it across the counter. Every creak of the RV frame, every sway of branches outside, sounded like a footstep closing in. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't leave either. Something kept me tethered, stubbornness, dread, maybe even fascination. The human mind is strange that way. We want to look away, but we can't. By afternoon, the forest seemed to press tighter around me. The sky grew gray, and even though no storm rolled in, The air carried that electric tension before thunder. I thought about walking back to the lodge, but the idea of facing Helen, of trying to explain what I had found, made my chest constrict. Would she believe me? Or worse, would she already know? As evening fell, I sat outside with my lantern lit, determined not to cower inside. The creek gurgled faintly, though even that sound seemed muffled tonight. That was when I noticed it. The absence of insects. No chirp of crickets, no buzz of mosquitoes, no flitting moths drawn to the lantern, just the empty quiet of the woods. It was unnatural, like the whole environment had stopped breathing. I set my mug down, scanning the trees, and that's when I saw movement. Not much. Just the slightest shift of shadow among the birches, too far for detail, but close enough to freeze me in place. A figure. Not lumbering like an animal, not darting like a bird, but standing, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. My breath stuttered. My skin prickled with the certainty that I had not imagined it. Someone or something had been there. I retreated inside, but left the lantern burning outside as bait, as though whatever it was might be drawn to the light instead of to me. Hours passed, slow and torturous. Midnight came and went, and I must have dozed off in the driver's seat because I woke with a jolt at the sound. Not knocking this time, scraping, long, steady, dragging scrapes along the metal side of the RV, my entire body locked up. The sound traveled slowly, methodically, from the back wheel well toward the door, pausing there, lingering. I could almost feel the pressure through the thin walls. I clutched my flashlight and held my breath, praying it would stop. It did, but silence didn't bring relief. It brought anticipation. Waiting for the next sound was worse than hearing it. Minutes ticked by, stretched into an eternity. Then came the faintest whisper. Not words exactly, not clear, but something low and breathy just beyond the glass. My stomach knotted. I couldn't tell if it was in my head or in the night. When dawn finally came, I staggered outside, half expecting to find deep gouges carved into the metal, but the panels were smooth, untouched, except for the dirt. On the ground by the door, another ring, bigger this time, nearly a foot across, and beside it something new, a faint handprint in the soil, pressed as though someone had crouched there, waiting. I wanted to run, pack up and drive until the mountains were behind me, until I saw gas stations and cell towers and other human beings. But some irrational part of me thought, if I left now it might follow, it might drag itself out of those trees and trail me down that narrow gravel road, and worse, I'd never know what I'd left behind. Curiosity is a curse. That afternoon, I forced myself back to the birches, back to the hollow. I don't know why, maybe to confirm my sanity, maybe to prove I wasn't imagining. The boards were still scattered where I had dropped them. The smell was stronger, and when I leaned close, hand trembling, I saw more clearly this time. It was a hand, pale bone mottled with scraps of dark fabric, a sleeve, half decayed, clinging to the soil. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I fell backward, gasping for air. As I scrambled to my feet, something else caught my eye. Another ring in the soil, right beside the hollow, fresh, damp, perfectly circular. My pulse spiked. It hadn't been there yesterday. It was as though something had stood watch over the grave after I left. I ran. Branches slapped my arms, breath ragged until I burst back into the clearing. My RV stood silent, lantern cold from where I'd left it the night before. But the ground around the wheels was marked now. 3 rings, each one slightly larger than the last, surrounding the vehicle like a boundary, like a claim. I collapsed against the door, shaking, staring at those circles. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a heavy, undeniable truth settle over me. I wasn't just imagining things. I wasn't just scared. Something out here knew I was here. And it wasn't leaving. I couldn't take my eyes off those rings. Perfect circles in the dirt, each larger than the last, encircling my RV as though marking territory or closing a trap. The morning sun was barely above the treetops, but it felt dim, weak, like light filtered through water. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, my boots crunching gravel, and everywhere I looked, the circles seemed deliberate, purposeful. My rational brain kept clawing for explanations. Heavy machinery? some old equipment left behind by the lodge. But no, the spacing was too clean, the symmetry too exact, the soil too freshly pressed. They were made by something out here with me. I thought about going back to Helen, about demanding answers, but another thought stopped me cold. What if she already knew? What if the reason she kept urging me to stay inside the lodge wasn't concern, but avoidance? Maybe she understood these things lingered out by the creek, by the birches, and maybe the walls of her lodge kept them at bay. The idea made my stomach twist. Shelter as bargain, not safety. By noon, I couldn't stand the weight of the RV anymore. The walls felt too thin, the air inside stale. I decided to walk, just to move, to feel ground under my feet that wasn't framed by 4 metal walls. I took the narrow path that followed the creek upstream. The water's voice grew louder as I walked, echoing off stone, masking the silence of the forest. For a while, it almost worked. My breathing slowed, and I began to imagine I could reset myself, shake off the night. But then I saw them. More rings. Pressed into the mud along the creek, spaced like footsteps but without direction. They weren't connected, didn't lead anywhere, just scattered, each one impossibly round, as if some invisible object had been placed there and lifted again. I crouched, touched the nearest one, and the soil was wet, freshly disturbed. My skin crawled. I wasn't alone out here. I turned back, moving faster, and that was when I heard it. A creak, long, slow, like timber bending under strain. Not from the lodge, not from the RV, but deep within the birches. I froze, heart hammering, eyes locked on the trees. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then another creak, and another. Rhythmic, almost like breathing. The hair on my arms stood up. I backed away slowly, not daring to turn my back, until I reached the clearing again. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in, smothering what little light the day had offered. I sat inside, blinds half shut, watching the birches through slits. The forest seemed closer now, as though the trees had leaned forward while I wasn't looking. I tried the radio, but all I got was static. My phone was dead weight in my pocket, a rectangle of useless glass. The silence pressed so hard that even my own breathing sounded foreign. As dusk fell, I braced myself for the knocking. I sat upright in bed, flashlight clutched in hand, every muscle taut. But when it came, it wasn't knocking. It was footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Circling the RV, gravel crunching under invisible weight. I held my breath, every nerve screaming as the steps stopped right by the door. Then came the sound that broke me. A long, dragging exhale, low and guttural, as though something pressed its face against the thin sheet of metal separating us. I snapped. I yanked the curtain back from the nearest window and shone my flashlight out. The beam cut across the clearing and landed on nothing. Just empty ground. But the steps resumed, now on the far side of the RV, pacing slowly. Taunting. My hand shook so badly the light jittered, and I slammed the curtain shut again, retreating to the center of the RV like that would make a difference. Hours dragged by. The pacing stopped eventually, replaced by silence. But silence isn't peace. Silence is waiting. I drifted in and out of restless sleep until the sound came again, not outside, but inside. Faint from beneath the RV floor, a scratching. Slow, steady, like claws dragging along the undercarriage. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my ear to the floor and froze. The sound wasn't random. It was tracing a shape. A circle. By dawn, the scratching stopped. When I stepped outside, the clearing was different. The 3 circles from yesterday had multiplied. 6 now. Perfect, concentric, wrapping the RV in rings like ripples in still water. My boots sank into them as I stumbled forward, dizzy, disoriented. Something was happening here. Something that wasn't just in my head. I forced myself toward the lodge, half running, half stumbling. When I burst inside, Helen was at the counter again, same calm face, same steady voice. But when she saw me, mud-streaked, wild-eyed, her expression faltered. I demanded to know what was happening, what lived out there, what those rings meant. For the first time, her voice broke. "You should have stayed inside," she whispered. I pressed her, desperate, angry. "What are they?" Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me, softer now, almost pitying. "They don't want you here," she said, "and they don't stop once they've marked you. Her words sank into me like ice water. Marked. The circles weren't warnings. They were claims. And I had already stepped into them, slept inside them, breathed their air. Whatever lingered out there had already chosen me. I staggered back to the RV in a daze, her words echoing in my skull. As I crossed the clearing, I caught sight of the birches again, and for just a moment, I saw it. A figure standing among them. Tall, too tall, limbs thin and bent wrong, head cocked unnaturally to the side. Watching me. The second my eyes locked onto it, it slid backward, vanishing into the trees without sound. My legs nearly gave out. I scrambled inside the RV, slammed the lock, and collapsed against the door, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The circles were spreading, the lodge no longer felt safe, and now I knew. Whatever haunted these woods wasn't just watching. It was waiting. That night I kept every light in the RV burning. The overheads, the small reading lamps, even the stove's hood light. The glow cast harsh shadows across the walls, but at least it kept the dark at bay. Or so I thought. The forest outside felt thicker than ever, as if the trees themselves leaned closer with every passing hour, their trunks casting longer and longer silhouettes across the clearing. I sat upright in the driver's seat, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, telling myself light was enough. Light had to be enough. The first sound came just after midnight, not the deliberate knocks, not the slow footsteps circling. This time it was a rhythm, soft but steady, almost like a drum beat carried from far away. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. My chest tightened as the sound drifted closer, seeping through the birches, moving with intention. I turned off the radio I'd been using for static, holding my breath. The beating stopped just beyond the tree line. Then came the creaking again. The wood groaning sound I'd heard before, but louder now, closer, more insistent. As though something heavy was shifting its weight across invisible boards. My mind twisted, trying to picture it. A platform suspended among the trees, some forgotten structure alive again under invisible strain. But the creaking moved with purpose, circling, pressing closer, until I swore I felt it vibrating faintly through the RV walls. I snapped. I grabbed the door handle, flung it open, and blasted my flashlight into the night. My beam swept the clearing. Nothing. Just empty grass, damp soil, the birches gleaming pale under weak moonlight. But the circles, there were more. Dozens now, sprawling out from the RV in widening ripples. So many they overlapped. Some were fresh, dark with moisture. Others had already begun to dry. My knees nearly buckled. They hadn't just been pressing against the soil one at a time. They had been multiplying night after night until they claimed the entire clearing. I stumbled backward into the RV, slammed the door, locked it twice, even though I knew the lock meant nothing. My breathing came fast and ragged, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my temples. That's when I heard it. Not outside. Inside. A sound from the very back of the RV. Soft, low, dragging. Like fingertips gliding slowly along the cabinetry. I froze, every nerve alight, flashlight trembling in my grip. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was the fridge, maybe the frame settling, maybe a raccoon had somehow crawled in. But then it came again. Slow. Steady. Deliberate. A whisper of contact tracing its way closer down the narrow hall toward where I sat. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere safer than here. My voice cracked as I shouted into the dark. Get out! The words felt thin, ridiculous, swallowed immediately by the RV's stale air. Silence followed. Thick, suffocating silence. And then a whisper. Not words I could understand, not even clearly human, but a drawn-out exhale that carried shape. It came from the dark hall. I backed against the door, flashlight beam jerking across the cabinets, the bed, the counter. Nothing moved. Nothing showed itself. But the whisper lingered, curling into my ears, filling my chest with the certainty that I was no longer alone in my own vehicle. I must have lost time after that. My memories of the night are fragments. Light beams flashing across empty corners, my hands trembling too hard to hold the flashlight steady, the taste of metal in my mouth as though the very air had soured. I don't know if I slept, or if I simply shut down until the first threads of dawn light pulled me back into myself. When I stumbled outside that morning, the sight broke me. The clearing was covered in circles, hundreds of them, overlapping, weaving into one another, stretching all the way to the birch grove. It was no longer random. They formed a pattern now, wide spirals pulling toward the grove where I had uncovered the boards, toward the hollow. I dropped to my knees, nausea rolling through me, bile stinging the back of my throat. It wasn't just marking territory. It wasn't just pressing claims. It was building something, drawing something, a map, a ritual, I didn't know. But the spirals pointed in one direction, and I already knew what was waiting at the center. I couldn't bear it anymore. I ran. Not down the gravel road, not back to the lodge, but straight toward the birches. My boots tore up soil, kicked through circles, but no matter how I tried to avoid them, I landed in them again and again, as though they pulled me in. The smell hit me before I reached the hollow. Sweet rot, iron tang, old earth. My stomach flipped, but I pushed forward until I reached the boards, and there it was. The hand, pale bone now almost fully uncovered, the sleeve in tatters, soil crumbling away. But it wasn't alone. More shapes were emerging as the earth caved. Another hand, a shoulder, a rib cage, an entire body tangled in roots and rot, staring up through sockets where eyes had once been. I staggered back, gagging, but my heel caught on another board, and I fell hard. The ground beneath me gave way. My body crashed through rotting wood into a cavity beneath. Darkness swallowed me. The smell hit like a wave, thick, choking, impossible. I gagged, clawing at the soil, my hands brushing against not wood, not stone, but something soft. Fabric. Skin. I screamed, scrambling upward, pulling myself through the broken boards until I tumbled into daylight again. My palms were coated in dirt. But not just dirt, smears of something darker, wetter. My breath came in heaves, my vision swam, and I ran. Back through the clearing, across the spirals, back to the RV. I collapsed inside, locked the door, and pressed my back to it, gasping, shaking, unable to stop replaying the feeling of that soft resistance beneath my hands. Not all the bodies in that hollow had rotted to bone. Some had only just begun. I sat slumped against the RV door, my body trembling, my chest tight as if something heavy pressed down on it from above. My fingers wouldn't unclench, smeared with blackened earth and the sickly residue of what I'd touched in that hollow. I wanted to scrub them raw, to wash the stink off my skin, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My mind kept replaying the moment, the feel of fabric, the slack weight of something yielding beneath my palm. That wasn't imagination. That wasn't paranoia. There were bodies buried beneath those birches. The thought should have pushed me to leave immediately. Pack up, fire the ignition, get back on the gravel road, and never look back. But when I tried to picture it, the thought twisted in my mind. I imagined driving down that long, narrow road, only to find the spirals following me, etched into the dirt where there should be tire tracks, pressed into the asphalt itself. I imagined headlights sweeping over the same birch grove again and again, the road looping back on itself no matter how many miles I drove. I couldn't shake the sense that leaving wouldn't save me, that I'd already stepped too far inside. By late afternoon, the forest felt wrong in a way I couldn't describe. The air didn't just hang heavy. It pulsed, faint vibrations that prickled my skin and made my teeth ache. The creek was silent. The wind had died. The world outside my windows held its breath, waiting. I sat at the small dinette staring at the blinds until the first knock came. It wasn't like the others. This one shook the whole RV. 3 blows, deep and hollow as though a massive hand had slammed against the metal. My heart lurched into my throat. I froze, barely breathing, but the second round came harder. 3 strikes, booming, rattling the cabinets. My mug slid off the table and shattered on the floor. I stood trembling, flashlight gripped so hard my knuckles burned. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. A silence filled with expectation, with weight. Then came the scrape, low, long, dragging claws tracing another circle across the outside wall. The RV groaned faintly, as though something leaned against it, pressing in. I stumbled toward the driver's seat, fumbling for the keys, but they slipped from my shaking hands and clattered onto the floor. I dropped to my knees, scrambling for them, and that's when I heard it, above me, a creak on the roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing the length of the vehicle. The ceiling bowed ever so slightly, dust raining down from vents, the metal skin complaining under weight that shouldn't be there. My flashlight beam quivered as I aimed it upward, as if that thin skin could part and reveal what crouched above. Another creak, another, then silence. I waited, every nerve on fire, until the next sound came, not on the roof, but under me, from beneath the RV floor. A thud, then another, not random, pounding in rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. The same rhythm I'd heard in the distance last night. Now it was here, inside my perimeter, inside my rings. Something primal broke inside me. I scrambled into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting twin cones into the clearing. For a split second, I felt relief, power, motion, escape. I slammed the gear shift into drive and floored the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, tearing through the outermost circles, gravel and dirt spraying beneath the wheels. But as the headlights swept across the birch grove, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them. Thin, pale shapes standing motionless among the trees, their heads cocked at unnatural angles, arms dangling too long at their sides. Their faces were indistinct, shadows where eyes and mouths should be, but their attention was unmistakable. Every single one of them was turned toward me, watching. I screamed, the sound tearing my throat raw, and wrenched the wheel. The RV fishtailed, skidding across the dirt before catching traction on the gravel road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My eyes locked on the road ahead, on the dim tunnel of my headlights carving through black forest. My pulse hammered so violently I thought I might black out, but my hands stayed tight on the wheel. Escape. I just had to escape. The road twisted, climbed, dipped. Branches clawed at the sides of the RV. My high beams cut through the dark, but no matter how far I drove, no matter how many turns I took, the forest didn't change. The same pines, the same leaning birches, the same steep embankments. The odometer ticked, but the lodge never fell behind. The clearing never disappeared. And then I saw it, through the windshield, at the next bend. My RV, parked in the clearing, lantern glowing faintly outside, door shut tight, exactly as I'd left it before I started the engine. My mind reeled, stomach heaving. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching, the RV lurching to a stop. Headlights beamed straight at myself, at another version of my own vehicle. The silence after the screech was unbearable. No insects, no creak, no engine noise. Just the faint creaking of wood in the birches and the echo of my own ragged breathing. I squeezed the wheel so hard it cut into my palms, and I realized in that moment there was no road out, no escape. I was trapped in whatever this was, and it wasn't finished with me yet. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, my headlights glaring at my own RV parked ahead of me. It was impossible, but there it was, same model, same dented bumper, same lantern still flickering outside the door. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe I had circled back without realizing. Maybe the road had looped. But the problem was, I hadn't made a loop. I'd driven straight, no turns that could have led me back. Yet the impossible stared me down. I killed the engine, and the forest swallowed the sound. The lantern by the door of that other RV swayed faintly, though there was no wind. My throat went dry. I wanted to reverse, to put distance between myself and whatever this was, but something told me, no matter which way I turned, I'd end up here again. Then the figures stepped out from the trees. At first they moved slow, as though testing the air. Pale silhouettes, too thin, limbs bending just a little too far at the joints. Their heads hung forward, jerking in small twitches, like marionettes pulled on stiff strings. One stepped into the full beam of my headlights, and my stomach clenched. Its skin wasn't skin at all. It was pale earth, crumbling in places to reveal black soil beneath, yet somehow it held shape. Its eyes were hollows. Its mouth was a seam that had never opened. More followed. 12, then 24. They poured from the tree line in silence, each one stopping just beyond the spirals carved into the soil, as though the circles themselves were boundaries they couldn't yet cross. They stood there, watching, heads cocked in unison, their stillness more terrifying than any sudden movement could have been. I turned the key again, desperate. The engine sputtered, roared, and I slammed the accelerator. The RV leapt forward, tearing across the clearing toward the other RV. I didn't care what was real anymore. I just needed motion, momentum, anything. But the moment my headlights hit other RV head-on, it vanished. Gone. Like smoke swept away, and suddenly I was plowing straight into emptiness, dirt, circles, and figures. I swerved hard, tires spitting gravel, and skidded sideways to a halt just short of the birches. My pulse thundered in my ears. The figures hadn't moved, but now the spirals seemed brighter somehow, as though the damp soil reflected moonlight that wasn't there. They pulsed faintly as if breathing, and then came the sound, the deep dragging creak of wood, but multiplied, overlapping, not one weight shifting, but many. The entire grove groaned as if alive, boards flexing under countless unseen feet. I stumbled out of the RV, flashlight in hand, though the beam shook so hard it flickered across tree trunks like lightning. "What do you want?" My voice cracked, swallowed instantly by the night. The figures didn't answer. They only tilted their heads farther, bodies twitching in unison. But from the hollow in the ground, from the place where the boards had broken, came something worse than silence. A voice. Not loud, not clear, but deep. Muffled by soil and rot, yet unmistakably human. It said my name. The sound rooted me to the spot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It came again, dragging through the dirt, rasping as if from lungs long collapsed. My name. Drawn out, broken, but mine. I staggered backward, shaking my head. No. No, no. But the voice followed, rolling through the ground like a current, pressing up from beneath my feet. The figures at the tree line shifted then, not forward, down. They began to sink, collapsing into the spirals one by one, their bodies breaking apart into soil as they hit the rings. The circles swallowed them soundlessly, as though the ground had opened only for them. My light flickered across empty spaces where they had stood moments ago, now nothing but fresh, damp earth marked with new rings. And still the voice whispered my name, from below, from everywhere. I spun, desperate, and my flashlight caught movement near my RV. Someone stood by the door. Not a figure, not a shadow, me. My own face staring back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, one hand resting on the handle. My knees buckled. The other me smiled faintly, lips stretched too wide, and stepped inside. The lantern outside flickered, then went dark. Panic exploded in me. I ran, stumbling through the circles, not caring if I crushed them underfoot. The soil felt soft, too soft, sucking at my boots as though trying to pull me down. My lungs burned, my throat raw, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the spirals, away from the hollow, away from the RV that wasn't mine anymore. But the forest didn't let me go. Every direction looked the same. Trunks like black bars, sky sealed by branches, no path, no creek, no road. I turned in circles until the world itself spun, until the ground tilted and I fell hard, my flashlight skittering away. Darkness swallowed everything but the faintest pulse of rings glowing in the soil. And underneath me, faint but certain, the earth whispered my name again. I lay there on the ground, cheek pressed into damp soil, my chest heaving so hard it felt like my ribs would split. The earth wasn't solid anymore. It shifted beneath me, a slow rise and fall, like I was lying on the chest of something enormous, something breathing just under the surface. I scrambled to my knees, clawing at roots and rocks, desperate to stand. But the ground flexed again, throwing me off balance. The forest groaned with it, birches creaking in unison like ribs straining to contain what pressed upward. Then the whisper came again. My name, broken and rasping, closer now. Not muffled by soil this time, but rising through it. I staggered back, boots sinking into a fresh ring that hadn't been there seconds before. The circle glowed faintly, damp edges shimmering, and a sudden thought froze me. Each ring wasn't just a mark. It was a boundary, a step closer, a countdown. My flashlight beam jittered wildly as I searched the clearing. The RV loomed across the spirals, but its windows were dark. No glow, no safety, just a black shell that might no longer belong to me. A part of me screamed to run for it anyway, to shut myself inside, but I couldn't bring my legs to obey. Because from the hollow near the birches, the boards were shifting. One cracked in half with a splintering snap. Another bowed upward as soil heaved beneath it. A smell rushed out, foul and cloying, so thick it coated my tongue, the stench of iron and rot, of graves left open too long. I gagged, stumbled back, eyes locked on the hollow as the earth split wider. And then I saw it. A hand. Not bone this time, but wet, blackened flesh curling its fingers through the soil, nails long, cracked, caked with dirt. The arm followed, clothed in tattered fabric that sagged from its frame. It clawed upward, dragging something larger with it. My stomach clenched as a head broke the surface, hair matted, jaw unhinged too wide, soil pouring from its mouth like breath. Its eye sockets were hollow, but I swore it was looking at me. I stumbled backward until my spine hit a tree. My flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam cutting across the clearing, and that's when I realized the birches weren't just groaning. They were bending. Slowly, impossibly, the trunks leaned inward, curving toward the hollow, toward me. Their white bark split with cracks like veins, sap oozing thick and dark. The forest wasn't just a backdrop, it was part of this thing. It was alive, and it was closing in. The figure dragged itself fully from the ground now, collapsing onto hands and knees, body twitching as though unused to air. Its mouth opened wider, too wide, and soil spilled out in heavy clumps. When it spoke again, my name rattled from its throat, wet and broken, but layered, like many voices speaking at once. My blood ran cold. I bolted. I don't remember deciding to move. I just ran, tearing through circles, crashing into branches, lungs burning. The forest blurred, trunks rushing past, the ground sloping unpredictably beneath me. I didn't care where I was going, only away. But no matter how far I ran, the sounds followed, the dragging creak of wood, the whisper of my name, the pounding of 3 beats. Pause, 3 beats, pause, always just behind me. At last I broke into another clearing and collapsed, my legs refusing to carry me further. For a moment I thought I'd escaped. The trees were thinner here, the sky visible. Stars blinked coldly above, the first I'd seen in days. But when I looked down, my stomach hollowed. The clearing was covered in circles. Hundreds of them, overlapping, pulsing faintly like the rings on water. They spread out in spirals that converged at the very center, where I now stood. My flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed me whole, and from the tree line, pale figures began to emerge again. Dozens of them, silent, stepping carefully between the circles as if respecting them. They stopped at the edge, forming a wall around me. Heads tilted, bodies twitching, waiting. The ground beneath me trembled. The breathing rose again, deeper, heavier, vibrating through my bones. The soil swelled at my feet and cracks spidered outward, glowing faintly with a sick light from below. Something vast was pushing upward, straining against the earth. I fell to my knees, tears burning my eyes, my voice breaking into the stillness. Why me? The question was ripped from my chest, raw and desperate. No answer came. Only my name again, rolling from below, layered with countless voices, each one ragged and pleading. As though whatever lived under the soil wasn't a single thing, but many, trapped, waiting, calling. The figures around me leaned forward in unison. The birches groaned louder, splitting bark, spilling sap that smelled like blood. The ground cracked wider. And I knew then this wasn't about discovery. It wasn't about haunting. It was about replacement. They weren't just marking me. They were choosing me. The soil split open beneath me, and the world tilted. Cold earth swallowed my legs, dragging me down. I clawed at the dirt, nails tearing, but the rings pulsed brighter, locking me in place. The last thing I saw before the ground closed over me was the circle of pale figures leaning closer, their hollow faces calm, patient, as though they'd been waiting for this moment all along. And then darkness claimed me. I woke choking on earth. Soil clogged my nose, pressed against my eyes, filled my mouth until I gagged and spit it out. My arms thrashed, but there was no air, no light, only pressure on all sides. Panic exploded in me, claustrophobic, suffocating terror. I clawed upward, but the dirt pressed back, sliding between my fingers, pouring into my sleeves. Every movement felt smaller than the one before, every breath shallower. And then, beneath the panic, I realized I wasn't alone. Hands pressed against me, not one, but many. Some gripped my ankles, others slid cold fingers across my wrists, others pressed against my chest, not to hold me down, but to welcome me deeper. I couldn't scream. The soil filled my throat. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might rupture. But the hands moved with eerie gentleness, guiding me, pulling me downward as though they'd been waiting centuries for me to arrive. The deeper I sank, the more I heard them. Voices all around, not muffled anymore, but pressed directly into my skull. They whispered in overlapping tones, rising and falling like a tide. Some begged, some laughed. Some spoke my name over and over until it lost meaning. I tried to block them out, but there was no escape. The voices were inside me, seeping through bone and blood. At last, the crushing weight eased. My body dropped into a cavern of air, and I collapsed onto something solid. Gasping, I clawed the dirt from my face, blinking against darkness so complete it felt physical. My flashlight was gone, my phone useless. But I didn't need light to know where I was. The smell told me first. Sweet rot, rust, wet wood, the scent of earth that had been opened too many times. My hands explored blindly, brushing over soil, splinters, and, God help me, fabric. Clothing still clinging to bodies. The voices grew louder, and as my eyes adjusted, I realized the darkness wasn't total. A faint glow pulsed from the walls of the cavern, greenish and sick, like fungus feeding on death. And in that glow, I saw them. Dozens of bodies pressed into the earthen walls, half buried, their faces tilted outward as though watching me. Some were skeletal, hollow-eyed. Others still had shreds of flesh, lips pulled back in eternal gasps. Their fingers jutted from the soil, curling and twitching as though trying to reach me even now. I staggered backward, bile burning my throat. My boots crunched on bones, too many bones. Skulls cracked under my heel, jaws split. Ribs gave way like brittle sticks. I pressed against the wall, my own breath ragged, and the faces closest to me moved. Their mouths opened, soil spilling out, and they whispered my name in unison. I clamped my hands over my ears, screaming, but the sound only grew louder. It wasn't in the cavern, it was inside me. The glow pulsed brighter with each whispered syllable, casting light across the chamber floor. That's when I saw it. The spiral. Etched into the ground itself, a massive spiral carved deep into the soil, circles upon circles winding inward toward the very center. Bones lined its grooves like offerings, skulls placed at intervals, hands arranged palm up as if waiting. And at the center, something moved. It wasn't a body. Not exactly. It was larger, a shape half-formed, its edges shifting like soil refusing to stay still, limbs stretched and retracted. A torso rose and collapsed. Faces flickered across its surface, men, women, children, appearing and dissolving into the mass. Each face mouthed my name. Each voice joined the chorus. The thing wasn't one of them. It was all of them. Everything buried here, every soul, every body, fused into a single writhing mass that pulsed with hunger. I stumbled back, tears streaming, my mind fracturing under the weight of it. The spiral glowed beneath my feet, rings tightening, pulling me forward. My boots scraped against bones as I resisted, but the ground dragged at me, sucking me toward the center. The mass rose higher, stretching, faces bulging from its surface, mouths opening too wide, and from its core came that voice, the one that had first called me from beneath the birches. It said my name again, slow and final as though sealing a claim. No! I screamed, my throat raw, but the spiral didn't care. The pull grew stronger, dragging me across the bone-lined grooves, pulling me into the center where the mass waited. Its arms, or what passed for arms, unfurled, dozens of hands extending at once, fingers too long, nails cracked and sharp. They reached for me, each touch cold as grave soil, each grip pulling me closer. I thrashed, kicked, clawed, but every movement only drew more hands. My legs disappeared into the spiral, then my waist, my chest. The mass loomed over me, faces pressing forward, mouths yawning open. I screamed until my voice broke, the sound joining theirs, my name swallowed in the chorus. The hands closed around my head, tilting it upward, forcing my eyes toward the shifting core of the thing. And in that moment, I understood. The rings, the knocking, the whispers, it had all been ritual, not random, not haunting, a process, a choosing. The spiral wasn't a map, it was a trap, a mechanism to pull me here, to feed the thing that slept beneath the lodge, beneath the forest, beneath all of it. As the mass surged forward, swallowing me in cold soil and bone, the last thought that pierced my terror was the cruelest one. This was never an accident. I hadn't stumbled on it. I had been led here, step by step, circle by circle, until there was nowhere left to go, and then the dark took me whole. I don't know how long the dark held me. Time didn't feel like time anymore. It felt like a spiral itself, turning inward, each moment pulling me deeper instead of carrying me forward. At first, I thought I was dying. My lungs burned, my body went numb, the pressure of soil pressed against my skull. But death never came. Instead, I began to feel the others. They weren't voices now, not whispers from beyond, but presence. Countless minds pressed against mine, jagged and broken, memories seared into me as though I'd lived them myself. A hunter crushed under a falling branch decades ago. A woman who'd followed the wrong trail at dusk and never returned. A child lost in a storm, his tiny voice still crying for his mother long after his lungs had filled with earth. Each story pierced me, took root in me, until I couldn't tell which memories were mine anymore. I screamed, but the sound didn't leave my mouth. It joined theirs, another note in an endless chorus. Faces flickered in the dark, sometimes in front of me, sometimes behind my own eyes. They turned toward me, hollow sockets brimming with recognition. They hadn't been calling my name to warn me. They had been calling my name to welcome me. And then came the moment of clarity. I opened my eyes, and I was no longer in the cavern. I stood in the clearing again, under pale dawn light. My RV sat where I'd left it, door closed, lantern guttering weakly on the step. The spirals were gone. The ground was smooth. The birches stood tall and straight, their bark clean, their branches still. For a heartbeat, I thought it had all been a nightmare. Then I saw him, me, sitting in the driver's seat of the RV, head bowed forward as though asleep. I staggered closer, numb, unable to stop myself. My boots made no sound on the soil. When I reached the window, I saw my own face reflected back, calm, eyes shut, hands loose on the wheel. Alive, breathing. But not me anymore, because I wasn't casting a reflection. I raised a hand to the glass, and the figure inside didn't move. My palm hovered there, inches away, trembling, and in that moment, the truth cracked open inside me like rotten wood. The spiral hadn't taken my life, it had taken my place. Whatever climbed into that RV wore my face now, carried my voice, breathed my air. And me? I was just one more voice in the soil. The birches creaked softly like a sigh. The clearing shimmered, and I felt myself dissolving, edges blurring, body fading into something softer, thinner. My scream caught in my throat, but no sound came. Only silence. Only the slow press of earth rising to claim me again. I tried to remember who I was, my name, my home, the simple joy of a cup of coffee at sunrise, but the memories slid away, stripped from me as easily as skin from bone. The only thing left was the spiral, turning, endless. And then I was back in the cavern, not as a body, but as a face pressed into the wall, my mouth filled with soil, my hollow eyes staring outward, waiting for the next traveler bold or foolish enough to park by the creek. My lips parted, and though I no longer had breath, I felt the whisper rise anyway. A name, not mine anymore, someone else's, someone coming. And I understood then that this place wasn't a mistake, not an accident. It was a design. A lodge set on the edge of nothing, a clearing meant to catch wanderers, a forest that never let go, a spiral that never stopped turning. And I was part of it now. Forever. So if you ever find yourself alone at a remote lodge, if you ever camp by a birch grove where the creek runs silent and the ground feels too soft, listen closely, because the forest will call. And when it whispers your name, you'll think you're imagining things. But you're not. You're being chosen. I've always that the fire is the only thing between us and the dark. It's not just about the warmth or the light. It's about what you can't see when the flames die down, what waits just beyond the reach of the glow. I learned that truth the hard way one night at a lonely RV campground in northern New Mexico, when I looked up from the crackling logs and realized I wasn't sitting there alone anymore. That trip started like so many others, nothing unusual about it at all. My name's Daniel, 46 years old, divorced, no kids. I work in construction, and whenever I've got the time and the money, I take my old Winnebago out to the far reaches of the country, to places where cell service doesn't reach, and the stars feel close enough to touch. I tell myself it's to clear my head, to get away from the noise of town, but truthfully, sometimes I think I'm running from myself more than anything else. The spot I chose that fall was off a dusty county road that didn't even show up on my GPS. I'd read about it once, buried deep in an old RV forum post from a guy who swore it was the last true quiet place in the Southwest. The way he described it stuck with me. How the nights were so silent you could hear the crack of shifting stones, how the stars painted the mesas silver. He said he'd only camped there once because he couldn't stand how lonely it felt, but for me, that was the appeal. It was early October, and the wind carried that dry, sharp edge of desert air that cuts your lungs when the sun drops. I pulled in around dusk, parking the RV near a clump of piñon pines, the only sign of cover for miles. The site had no hookups, no other rigs in sight, not even an old fire ring left behind. Just me, the scrubland, and a sky so wide it made me feel like a speck. I set up camp the way I always do, leveled the RV, set out my folding chair, and stacked kindling into a pyramid. The fire took easy. It was one of those nights where the sparks seemed to jump higher than usual, like they wanted to join the stars overhead. I cooked a simple meal on the cast iron, beans and sausage, then poured myself a cup of coffee, even though the hour was late. I wanted to savor the quiet, to let it soak in after weeks of hammer drills and engines. But silence is never just silence. You learn that out here. There are layers to it. The chirp of crickets that suddenly stop in unison, the far-off bark of coyotes rolling like laughter across the plains, the shifting crackle of firewood. At first, I was comfortable, legs stretched out, coffee steaming in my hands. But as the night wore on, that silence began to feel heavier, like a blanket pressed down over the land. I don't know what time it was when I first noticed the sound, a slow crunch like a boot on gravel, just beyond the circle of firelight. My body froze before my mind even caught up. Out here, you don't expect footsteps. A deer maybe, or an elk passing through, but this was deliberate. One step, pause, another step. Human. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark. The fire popped, showering sparks, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape between the piñons. Tall, still, watching. Hello? My voice came out thinner than I intended, but I pushed it into the night. You out there? No answer, just the wind brushing dry grass. I told myself it could have been my imagination, nerves playing tricks. That's what solitude does to you. It makes every shadow look like a figure, every sound like it's coming for you. I sat back, but my heart didn't slow. The silence felt deeper now, expectant. And then, without a sound, he was there. Across the fire from me, on the other side of the flames, sat a man. I swear to you, one moment there was nothing. The next moment he was sitting there, legs crossed, hands resting loosely on his knees like he'd been there all along. The firelight carved his face in halves, one side bright, the other lost in shadow. He looked about my age, maybe older, with a sun-beaten face and eyes that reflected the flames too brightly. He didn't speak. He didn't even move, just watched me with a faint curve of a smile, like he knew something I didn't. My breath caught in my throat. Jesus, where the hell did you come from? Still nothing. Not a word. I gripped the arms of my chair, suddenly aware of how exposed I was, the RV behind me locked but too far to run without turning my back on him. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe he'd been camping nearby, maybe he'd wandered over. But I'd seen the land for miles, no other rigs, no tents. And the way he'd appeared, no, he hadn't walked into the light. He'd just been there. The stranger tilted his head, studying me like I was the unusual one. Then he leaned forward slightly, and in a voice so low I barely heard it over the crackle, he said, "You shouldn't be here." The words slid through me colder than the desert wind. My instinct was to laugh, to break the tension, but my throat was dry. "Why's that?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He didn't respond. He just kept staring, that half-smile never changing. The fire crackled between us, throwing shifting patterns across his face, but his expression stayed fixed, like the flames had no hold on him. I wanted to stand, to get inside the RV, but my body wouldn't move. I sat locked in place, every muscle tight, waiting for him to do something. Anything. The night pressed closer. The stars seemed to dim, and as I watched him, I realized something that made my stomach lurch. His clothes, if you could call them that, looked wrong. Not dirty, not torn, just out of time. A flannel shirt faded almost to gray, pants cut in a style I hadn't seen in decades, and his boots, old leather, cracked, the kind you'd expect to find in a museum display about settlers. I swallowed hard, my pulse drumming in my ears. "Listen, friend," I said, voice trembling now. "If you've got something to say, say it. Otherwise, you need to move along." But the stranger didn't move along. He just sat there, smiling faintly, eyes reflecting the fire as the silence deepened until it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. And that's when I noticed the smell, not smoke, not sagebrush, not the metallic tang of desert air. This was different, damp, earthy, like soil freshly turned. The smell of ground that's been opened, exposed, grave dirt. It seeped across the fire toward me, and with it came a memory I hadn't thought about in years. Something buried, something I'd tried to leave behind. And in that moment, staring at that stranger across my fire, I understood. He wasn't just some drifter. He was here for me. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. The man, the smell, the whole thing. Out here alone for too long, your mind can turn on you. That's what I told myself as I blinked into the flames, praying that when my eyes adjusted, he'd be gone. But he wasn't. He sat there like he belonged to that fire more than I did, like I was the intruder. I tried to steady my breathing. "Look," I said, my voice rasping, "I don't know what you want, but this isn't funny. If you're passing through, I'll share a meal, some coffee. Then you can go your way. I'll go mine." For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw something change in his eyes. Not kindness, not interest, just a shadow, like a ripple moving through deep water. And then he finally spoke again, his words so slow they almost felt like they were dragged up from the earth itself. "You always leave them," he said. It wasn't a question. The words hit me square in the chest, though I didn't understand why. My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because as soon as those words left his mouth, the memories came rushing back. The things I'd buried, the choices I'd made when I was younger, when I was reckless, when I thought life was something you could always escape from if you just moved far enough, camped remote enough, drove fast enough. Faces. I saw faces in the flames. My ex-wife, standing in the doorway with tears streaking down her face while I packed a bag. My younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years, his number still unanswered on my phone. Even my father, the last time I saw him before he passed, reaching for my hand while I told myself I was too busy to stay another night. Leave them. That's what I did, wasn't it? One after another until there was nothing left but me and the road. Me and the fire. I shook my head, trying to claw myself back to reality. "You don't know me," I said. My voice cracked, but I forced strength into it. "You don't know a damn thing about me." The stranger tilted his head again, that faint smile never breaking. "I know enough." The fire popped, and for an instant I swore his face wasn't a face at all, but something stretched thin, pale, and hollow where the eyes should have been. I blinked, and he was normal again, or what passed for normal. But the smell was stronger now, that damp, graveyard scent that turned my stomach. I couldn't sit there anymore. My body finally broke free of its paralysis, and I pushed myself up from the chair. "That's it," I said, though my voice shook. "I don't care who you are, you need to leave." He didn't move. He didn't even blink. I backed toward the RV, never taking my eyes off him. Every instinct screamed not to turn around. My hand fumbled for the latch, and I yanked the door open, stumbling inside. I slammed it shut and locked it, chest heaving. The RV felt different, smaller, tighter, like the walls were pressing in. I pulled the curtains shut, though the firelight still leaked through the cracks, painting shifting shadows across the ceiling. I told myself I was safe in here, that steel and glass separated me from him, but the smell followed me inside. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping my knees, trying to steady myself. "You're tired, Daniel." I whispered, "You're just tired. It's nothing but a trick of the fire, your own mind throwing ghosts at you." And then 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, against the RV door. My blood froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again, louder this time, echoing through the metal frame. My hand itched toward the drawer where I kept a flashlight, though it felt useless against whatever waited outside. A voice, muffled but clear, came through the thin walls. The same voice, his voice. "You can't lock me out." The words chilled me more than the desert night ever could. My skin crawled, and for the first time in years I prayed. Not out loud, not to anyone in particular, just a desperate thought thrown upward. Please let this end. Let me wake up from this. But it wasn't a dream. The knocking stopped. Silence pressed in. I waited, straining to hear if he'd moved, if he'd walked away. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no rustle of grass. Just silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I gathered the courage to peek through the curtain. The fire was still burning outside, low now, embers glowing red. The chair sat empty. No stranger. I exhaled hard, the tension draining just enough for me to collapse back onto the bed. My body shook, adrenaline leaving me weak. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he'd never been there. I don't know how long I sat there, half awake, half dreaming. My eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling me under. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning, that daylight would make sense of it. But when I finally drifted into sleep, I didn't dream of home or family or safety. I dreamed of fire, a ring of flames, wide and endless, and across it, the stranger staring at me with eyes like coals. He didn't speak this time. He didn't have to, because I could feel the weight of his words echoing inside me, words that hadn't left his mouth but were carved into my bones. "You always leave them." And when I jerked awake to the hiss of dying embers outside, I swore I could still smell the earth, damp and freshly turned, seeping through every corner of the RV. Morning didn't bring relief. I thought it would. I thought the sun would burn away whatever I saw, whatever I smelled, whatever words burrowed into me during the night. That's what always happens after nightmares, right? The light exposes the trick, shows you it was just your mind folding in on itself. But when I opened the RV door at dawn, the fire pit still smoldered, and the chair across from mine was tipped back slightly, like someone had just risen from it. The sight of it made my stomach knot. I hadn't left the chair like that. I would have noticed. The desert was quiet in the pale morning light, a sharp wind cutting across the mesa. My breath puffed in the cold, and every sound felt amplified. The groan of the RV's metal siding, the scrape of gravel under my boots. I scanned the land in every direction, expecting to see a figure retreating in the distance, but there was nothing. No footprints but mine, no sign anyone had ever been here. And yet the smell lingered. Faint, but there. Damp earth. It clung to the air even as the sun rose higher, even as I stirred the fire to ash and told myself to forget it. I brewed coffee, hoping the bitterness would shake me back into myself. As I sat at the little table inside the RV, staring out at the emptiness, I kept replaying his words. "You always leave them." Why those words? Why not something threatening, something that would make sense for a stranger trying to scare me off? Why did it feel like he knew me? Like he'd pulled something straight out of my chest I hadn't wanted to face. I told myself the truth was simpler. It was exhaustion. It was the loneliness of camping alone too long. My divorce, my family estranged. Hell, maybe I'd been carrying those ghosts with me all along, and the fire just gave them shape. But when I stood to clean the coffee pot, I saw it. On the inside of the RV door, near the bottom, smeared faintly into the dust and condensation, were 3 marks. 3 long, vertical smudges, like the impression of fingers dragged downward. My stomach dropped. I reached for them without thinking, brushing my fingertips against the marks, but the moment I touched them, the smell hit me again. Dirt, heavy and wet. I staggered back, hand trembling. No, that wasn't possible. I needed out. Out of that RV, out of that campsite. I packed fast, tossing gear into cabinets without caring about the noise. The whole time I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see a face appear in the glass. By the time I fired up the engine, sweat clung to my back despite the chill. I tore down the dirt road faster than I should have, the RV rattling as tires chewed gravel. The mirrors showed nothing behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Not from outside, but from somewhere closer. Inside. It took hours to hit pavement again, and by then, the desert sun was high, glaring. I should have felt safe. Civilization wasn't far, but instead of easing, the pressure inside me only grew heavier, as though that stranger hadn't been left behind at the fire but had climbed in when I wasn't looking. I pulled into a gas station near a small town, one of those lonely places where the pumps are older than the attendants. I stepped out to fill the tank, trying to ground myself in the ordinary. The smell of gasoline, the buzz of a cracked fluorescent light, normal things that belonged to the world I knew. But when I walked inside to pay, the woman behind the counter froze. She was maybe late 50s, hair pulled back, tired eyes. She stopped mid-sentence as I approached, her gaze dropping to my boots. "You been digging?" she asked. The words jolted me. "What?" "Your boots," she said slowly. "They're caked with fresh soil, not the dry stuff we get out here. Wet. Black." I looked down. My boots were clean when I left the campsite. I hadn't stepped into mud, hadn't gone near water. But sure enough, thick clumps of dark, damp earth clung to the soles. I stumbled back a step, my pulse hammering. The woman frowned, her hand tightening on the edge of the counter. "You all right, mister? You don't look so good." I muttered something, shoved bills onto the counter, and hurried out before she could press further. Back in the RV, I scraped the boots against the step until clods of soil broke loose, heavy and wet, leaving streaks across the metal. The smell was sharp, undeniable. That's when the doubt cracked wide open. This wasn't just loneliness. This wasn't exhaustion. Something had followed me. The drive out of town felt endless. Every mile I expected the RV to give up beneath me, to stall in some lonely stretch where no one would find me. Every time I glanced in the rear view, I thought I saw movement in the back, just a flicker, a shifting shadow. But when I checked, it was only empty space. Still, I couldn't shake the thought, what if he wasn't bound to the fire? What if he wasn't bound to the land at all? What if he was bound to me? The road stretched on, cracked and sun-bleached, but I couldn't focus on it. His words circled me like vultures. You always leave them. By the time I found another campground, this one busier, with families and other rigs parked in neat rows, I was shaking. I thought maybe the presence of people would help, maybe the laughter of kids, the hum of generators, the sight of neighbors sitting in camp chairs would remind me that I wasn't alone. But when I stepped out to set up, I caught it again. Faint, but there. The smell. Damp, heavy soil clinging to the air like it belonged to me now. And when the sun dipped and the fires lit one by one across the campground, I couldn't stop myself from glancing at each flame, half expecting to see him already there, waiting across the glow. Night fell fast at that campground, and with it came the part of myself I'd been trying to hold back all day. The part that knew I hadn't left him behind. There were people all around me this time. Families laughing, the clatter of pots from neighboring rigs, radios playing faintly in the distance. Normal life. I should have felt safe. But as I sat outside my RV, firelight flickering against my face, all I could do was wait. Every pop of the wood sounded like a footstep. Every crack in the brush made my stomach seize. I tried not to look at the chair I'd placed across the fire, but my eyes kept drifting to it anyway. Empty. Always empty. Until it wasn't. I don't know how long I sat there, 10 minutes, an hour, but eventually my worst fear folded into reality. He was there. One blink and the chair across from me was filled. Same posture as before, same faint smile, like he'd been sitting there the whole time just waiting for me to notice. The sounds of the campground didn't change. Kids still shouted, marshmallows still sizzled, someone still strummed a guitar. No one else seemed to see him. It was like he existed only in the circle of my fire, a private apparition for me alone. My throat closed, breath coming shallow. "Why are you following me?" I whispered, though my voice shook so much it hardly carried. The stranger tilted his head, eyes reflecting the flames. This time he didn't delay. His voice came low, steady. "You think moving keeps you clean, but all you do is carry it farther." I gripped the arms of my chair so tightly my knuckles popped. "Carry what?" His smile widened, but it wasn't kind. "The soil." And suddenly I was aware of it again. The smell, stronger now, curling from beneath my own boots. I glanced down and felt my chest cave in. The ground beneath my chair was wet, blackened, as if waterlogged earth had replaced the dry desert soil. It spread outward in a dark stain, seeping from where I sat. I lurched up, stumbling back, nearly knocking the chair into the fire. My heart hammered as I gasped for air. Nobody else noticed. Families still carried on with their evenings, oblivious to the damp circle forming beneath me, to the figure staring at me from across the flames. I wanted to scream for help, to point and shout, "Do you see him? Tell me you see him." But some part of me knew the answer. They wouldn't. This was mine to bear. The stranger leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying like a whisper pressed against my ear, even though the fire separated us. "You've buried too much to run from it now." My knees weakened. I staggered toward the RV, half blind with panic. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, pressing my back to the frame as if that would hold him out. My chest heaved, sweat soaking through my shirt. I didn't know what to do. My rational mind screamed at me. This was hallucination, stress, something medical maybe, but everything in my body told me otherwise. This was real, too real. The RV felt suffocating. I turned on every light, flooding the small space with artificial brightness, but it didn't help. The smell seeped in through the vents, the seams of the windows, curling into my lungs, damp, heavy earth. I grabbed my keys. I couldn't stay, not here, not anywhere. I needed to move. I fired up the engine and drove out of that campground without looking back. The families, the fires, the voices, all of it disappeared in the rear view. Just me and the open road again, headlights cutting through the dark. But after a few miles, I glanced in the mirror, and my blood ran cold. He was sitting at the dinette table, right there inside the RV, his face half lit by the dash glow, that same faint smile fixed, eyes boring into me. I nearly swerved off the road. My hands clenched the wheel so hard my arms shook. I couldn't look again, couldn't confirm what I saw, because if I did, I was sure I'd lose control completely. But I didn't need to look. I could feel him there. The air behind me was thick, suffocating. Every mile, the smell grew stronger, filling the cabin until I gagged. My vision blurred with tears, fear, exhaustion, shame, I don't even know. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking into the roar of the engine. For a long moment, there was nothing, just my sobbing breath, the hum of tires. Then, softly from behind me, "I want you to stop running." The words hit like a hammer. My chest caved in, because deep down I knew he wasn't just talking about the road. He was talking about everything, my whole life. The steering wheel trembled beneath my grip as I fought to keep the rig straight. The smell was overwhelming now, Fred, as though the RV itself had been buried underground, and I was breathing soil instead of air. I drove until the road blurred, until exhaustion clawed at me so badly I could barely keep my eyes open. Finally, I pulled into a lonely rest stop, engine still idling, hands welded to the wheel. And when I finally gathered the courage to look into the rearview mirror again, he was gone. only empty space. But the soil was still there, smeared across the floor in thick, wet clumps, as if something had been dragged in from outside and left to rot inside my home. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat in the driver's seat long after the engine died, staring into the black stretch of highway, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But every time I shifted my gaze to the floor, the clumps of wet earth were still there, dark against the vinyl, seeping into the cracks. I tried scraping them with a rag, wiping with bottled water. Nothing worked. The soil seemed to sink deeper the harder I scrubbed, like the RV itself was swallowing it. By 3 a.m, I gave up. I sat there in the half-light of the dash, hands trembling, heart pounding. Every creak of the RV's frame made me flinch. The smell was thick, pressing, no matter how wide I opened the windows. At some point, I started whispering to myself, "You're losing it, Daniel, that's all. You've been alone too long. You're tired. You need help." But help was a concept that felt miles away. Out here, there was no doctor, no therapist, no friend. Just me and the fire I couldn't put out. When dawn finally crawled over the horizon, I stepped outside into the cold air, hoping the daylight would clean me out. The rest stop was empty, just a cracked asphalt lot and a row of leaning picnic tables. The silence was different here, less like a blanket, more like a void. I thought about calling someone, my brother, my ex-wife, even an old coworker I hadn't spoken to in years. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. What would I say? That I'd picked up a passenger no one else could see? That grave dirt was following me like a shadow? They'd hang up, or worse, they'd believe me. Instead, I sat at one of the picnic tables and stared at my hands. They were filthy, though I hadn't touched the soil. My nails packed with dirt, lines in my palms dark like they'd been rubbed in ashes. I scrubbed them against my jeans until the skin burned, but the stains remained. That's when the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest murmur. Not words, not clear. More like the low hum of someone breathing just behind my ear. I spun around. No one. The lot was empty, my RV the only vehicle in sight. But the hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest like it was inside me. And then I saw him. Not across a fire this time. Not in the rear view, but sitting right there on the picnic bench across from me. Elbows resting on the weathered wood, face inches from mine. I stumbled back so fast I fell, gravel biting into my palms. My lungs seized, a scream choking in my throat. He didn't move, didn't even blink. That same faint smile, eyes glinting like coals. "Enough," I croaked, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me? Why won't you leave me alone?" His head tilted, slow and deliberate, and for the first time the smile slipped. His voice came out rougher now, sharp like stone grinding on stone. "Because you never stayed." I froze. The words hit deeper than I wanted to admit. All the running, all the moving from place to place, campground to campground, leaving behind people who once trusted me, who once waited for me to return. My ex-wife's tears, my father's reaching hand, my brother's unanswered calls, faces flickering like ghosts. I wanted to deny it, to scream back that he didn't know me, that he wasn't real. But the truth was raw inside me, undeniable. "I couldn't stay," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I wasn't strong enough. For a moment, silence. His gaze bored into me, and I thought maybe, just maybe, there was pity there. But then he leaned closer, so close I could smell the damp soil radiating from his skin. "That's why I'm here," he said. The ground beneath the table began to darken. I watched, horrified, as wet earth bubbled up between the cracks in the pavement, spreading outward in a circle. It coated my boots, seeped into the fabric of my jeans where I'd fallen. I tried to scramble back, but my limbs felt heavy, weighed down by mud. No, I can't." Moise broke into sobs. The stranger's eyes locked on mine. His voice dropped to a whisper so low I felt it more than heard it. "Stop running." And then he was gone. The table sat empty. The lot silent, but the ground beneath me was still wet, dark stains spreading like ink through the cracks. My clothes clung damp against my skin, heavy with a smell I couldn't wash away. I stumbled back to the RV, shaking so hard I could barely fit the key in the lock. Inside, I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. I couldn't deny it anymore. He wasn't just a stranger. He was something older, something tied to every choice I'd buried, every life I'd walked away from. And no matter how far I drove, no matter how many fires I lit, he'd always find me, because he wasn't sitting at the fire. He was the fire. I drove until the lines on the highway blurred into one endless streak of white. I didn't stop for food, didn't stop for sleep. The tank ran low, and I coasted into a fuel station on fumes, hands shaking as I shoved the nozzle into the tank. The attendant didn't even look up. Maybe he saw something in my face that told him not to ask questions. Back on the road, the sun sank again. The desert gave way to scrub forest, shadows spilling long across the two-lane blacktop. My body screamed for rest, but I couldn't bring myself to stop because stopping meant fire, and fire meant him. And yet when darkness fell, I found myself pulling into another empty campground. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe surrender, maybe because some part of me knew I couldn't outrun it anymore. The gravel crunched under the RV tires as I rolled into a site tucked among junipers. No other campers, no families, no noise. Just me and the night. I cut the engine and sat there in the silence, forehead pressed against the wheel. My hands ached from clenching, my eyes raw from staring too long into nothing. I told myself I wouldn't build a fire, not this time. I'd stay inside, lights on, doors locked. But when I stepped out to breathe the cold air, my hands moved without me. I gathered kindling, I stacked logs, and before I even realized what I'd done, a fire roared in front of me, flames licking the air. I dropped into the folding chair, my body hollowed out. The fire popped and crackled, sparks spiraling upward. I didn't even resist. I just waited. And he came. Not sudden, not like before. This time I saw him emerge, slowly, as if he rose out of the ground itself, shape forming from the shadows until he was seated across from me, eyes glinting, faint smile fixed. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak at first. I just stared into the fire with him, the two of us locked in the same circle of light. Finally, my voice broke the silence. "I can't run anymore," I said. The stranger's head tilted, the smile flickering like the flames. "Good. I don't know what you are," I continued, words spilling out of me, ghost, demon, hallucination. "But I know why you're here. I've left people, I've abandoned them. I thought if I stayed moving I wouldn't have to face it, but it follows me. Always." The stranger leaned forward, eyes narrowing. For the first time, he looked less like a phantom and more like a mirror, reflecting the worst parts of myself. "Then face it," he whispered. The ground darkened beneath me again, damp earth spreading outward, swallowing the gravel. The smell was suffocating, wet and heavy, clinging to my lungs. My chair sank slightly, legs pressing into the muck. My breath caught, panic clawing at me, but I forced myself to stay. My instincts screamed to run, to scramble for the RV, but I stayed rooted. Tears blurred my vision. I left my wife when she begged me to stay. I left my father when he needed me most. I left my brother's calls unanswered. Every time someone reached for me, I turned away. That's the truth. That's who I am. The words tore from me like confession, raw and jagged. For a moment, silence. The fire hissed. The stranger's face flickered, shifting. Sometimes older, sometimes younger, sometimes so close to my own reflection it made my chest ache. Then he spoke. "Not who you are, who you chose to be." The fire roared higher, heat blasting against my skin, smoke choking me. The stranger's form blurred in the flames, no longer separate from them, but woven through every tongue of fire, every ember. His voice came from everywhere at once, booming and whispering in my ears and in my chest. "You can't bury it. You carry it. Always." I cried out, clutching my head, the truth burning hotter than the flames. Images seared into me, every moment of leaving, every face turned away. It felt endless, unbearable. And then, as suddenly as it rose, the fire snapped low again, just a crackle of embers. The stranger sat there, faint smile back on his lips, watching me through the smoke. "You're not here to escape," he said softly. "You're here to decide." My body trembled, soaked with sweat, clothes heavy with the smell of earth. I stared at him, voice breaking. "Decide what?" His eyes glowed like coals, unblinking. "Whether you'll keep running until the soil takes you, or whether you'll finally stay." The words hung in the night, heavy as stone, and for the first time since he'd appeared at my fire, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't threatening me. He wasn't trying to drag me down. He was offering me a choice. I didn't answer right away. My throat was raw, and my chest felt crushed beneath a weight I couldn't name. The firelight flickered across his face, sometimes sharpening into a man I almost recognized, sometimes dissolving into nothing more than suggestion. He waited, motionless, as though the entire desert had gone still around us. The silence stretched so long I thought maybe I had slipped into another dream, but the heat told me I was awake. The smell of damp earth clung stubbornly to the air, stronger than smoke, stronger than pine, and it reminded me of something I had tried for years to forget. The smell of the cemetery the day we buried my father. I swallowed hard, and words finally scraped out of me. I don't know how to stay. I don't know how to be what I've already failed to be. The stranger's head tilted again, just slightly, the fire painting a faint orange gleam across his teeth. "That's the lie you feed yourself, Daniel. You think because you left once, you'll always leave. But the truth is simpler. Every night, every fire, every mile, you choose again." I shook my head, almost laughing, though it sounded more like a sob. "You make it sound so easy, but I feel like I've already lost everything that matters." The stranger leaned forward, his eyes burning with something that wasn't pity, but wasn't cruelty either. "Then why are you still here?" The question stopped me. Why was I still here? If all I had left was regret, if all my life had become was one long road of leaving behind, why hadn't I driven myself into a wall or disappeared into the desert where no one would ever find me? Why had I kept moving, mile after mile, campground after campground, always setting a fire, always waiting? I realized then I was waiting for this moment. For him, for myself. The fire hissed as a gust of wind curled through the trees, carrying a cold that bit deep into my sweat-soaked clothes. My hands trembled, and I forced them flat against my knees to stop shaking. "I can't go back," I whispered. "I can't undo what I did." The stranger nodded slowly. "No, you can only go forward." And then, for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not flickering, not half-formed. His features settled into something steady, something solid. And it was me. Not exactly as I was now, but younger. Eyes sharp, face unlined by regret, shoulders squared like I still believed I could carry the weight of the world. My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. I stared at him, at myself, and all the years I had lost burned through me like dry wood. The younger version of me leaned closer, expression deadly serious. "If you keep running, you'll end up here forever. Fires and shadows and soil that swallows you whole. You'll vanish into the dark, and no one will even know you're gone. That's your ending, if you choose it." The fire cracked, shooting sparks high into the black sky. "But if you stay," he said, softer now, "if you finally stop, if you finally face the people you've left, you might still have something left to give. You might still have time." Tears spilled down my face before I even felt them. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the fear twisted sharp in my chest. The fear of walking back into lives that had moved on without me. The fear of seeing in their eyes what I already knew about myself. "What if they don't forgive me?" I asked, voice breaking. The younger me didn't look away. "Then you forgive yourself." The ground beneath my chair stopped sinking. The smell of damp soil thinned, replaced by clean smoke and pine. The fire steadied into a tall, bright flame, warm without suffocating. For the first time, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. The stranger, myself, smiled faintly. "It's your choice, but you don't have much time left to make it." And just like that, he was gone. The chair across from me sat empty, the firelight licking at nothing but shadows. I sat there for a long time, staring into the flames, the night pressing close around me. The desert was quiet again, the wind soft through the junipers. My heart still pounded, but not from panic. From something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. I stood slowly, legs stiff, back aching. The fire crackled, and for once, I didn't dread what it meant. I let it burn as I walked to the RV, every step deliberate. Inside, I sat at the table, pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years, and I began to write. Names, numbers, words I should have said a long time ago. Apologies. Promises. I didn't know if anyone would answer. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible. But I knew this. If I ran again, the stranger would be waiting at the next fire, and the one after that, and the one after that. And I couldn't live that way anymore. The night stretched on, but I wrote until dawn, the fire outside burning down to embers, the sky lightening to gray. And when the first sun broke the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The weight wasn't gone. The guilt wasn't gone. But for the first time, it didn't crush me. I was still here. I still had a choice, and I wasn't going to leave this fire behind. Morning came slowly, the kind of pale light that doesn't chase the dark so much as dilute it. I sat on the RV's step, staring at the fire pit where nothing remained but a blackened circle of ash and a faint curl of smoke. The cold air bit at my skin, sharper than coffee, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the stillness of a new day. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the notebook, the pages now heavy with my uneven handwriting, and turned it over in my hands. Names stared back at me, my wife, my brother, the father I could no longer reach except in memory. Some entries were phone numbers. Some were letters I would never send but had needed to write anyway. My chest hurt, not from fear this time, but from something almost unbearable, hope mixed with shame like a wound being cleaned. I packed slowly, every motion deliberate, every sound of zippers and clanking dishes, grounding me in reality. The whole time, I kept glancing back at the fire pit, half expecting him to still be there, waiting. But the stranger hadn't returned, not as a shadow, not as a reflection. He had left me with something worse than fear. Responsibility. By noon, I was back on the road, the RV rumbling steadily beneath me. The desert stretched wide on either side, endless sky above, the kind of view that makes you feel small but not crushed. I drove with the window cracked, letting the air sting my face, and for once I didn't feel like I was fleeing. Hours passed. My mind turned over what lay ahead like stones in a riverbed. Would my brother answer? Would my wife hang up the second she heard my voice? Would I have the courage to keep going if they didn't? The thought twisted my stomach, but underneath it, a steady current moved. I wasn't running anymore. That was enough to keep me driving. By dusk, I pulled into another campground, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Families clustered around their fires, children laughing, the smell of grilled food carrying on the breeze. It should have made me ache, but instead I felt something gentler. A reminder of what still exists in the world, even if I've been absent from it. I parked at a far edge of the loop, close enough to hear voices, far enough to be alone. For the first time since this started, I didn't gather wood. I didn't light a match. I sat outside in the cooling air, notebook in my lap, and I waited for the night to come without fire between me and it. The stars emerged, one by one, sharp and endless. The campground grew quieter as families drifted into their RVs and tents, their lanterns winking out. I sat there in the dark, pulse steady, and realized the truth. The stranger at my fire hadn't been a demon. He hadn't been a ghost. He had been me, all along. The part I buried, the part I feared, the part that refused to be abandoned any longer. He didn't need to return because I had finally stayed. I opened the notebook, found the first number, and dialed. The ring buzzed in my ear, each second pulling me taut, each breath shallow. I didn't know what I'd say. I didn't know how I'd make it right, but I was here. And this time I wasn't leaving. The fire may die, the smoke may clear, but the choice we make in its glow never disappears. That's the lesson I'll carry with me from one campground to the next for as long as I keep the wheels turning. Because the scariest thing isn't what waits for you in the dark. It's what waits inside you when the firelight fades. And sometimes the only way to survive is to finally stop running. Stop running. Sit down at your own fire. I never thought a place could betray me. A lake, of all things, something I had grown up trusting as a mirror of calm, a refuge from noise, a reminder that nature, even in its indifference, could hold you in its stillness. But That summer night, sitting in my old Volkswagen camper at the edge of a campground in northern Minnesota, I learned that even water can lie to you. It can show you what isn't there. It can become a mouth, waiting. I was 34, single, and restless when I made the trip. My Volkswagen Westphalia was the one thing I'd poured my time and money into, my escape hatch from a job that drained me and a city that pressed too hard. The van smelled of cedar from the little panels I'd built inside, its canvas top patched in places from years of storms, and it always felt like a loyal friend. That evening, after a long drive past fields that narrowed into dense pine forest, I found the lake campground almost by accident. The road dipped, then broke open to a clearing that smelled of wet moss and iron-rich earth. There were maybe 6 sites, most empty. A beat-up RV sat crooked at the far end, and a couple with lawn chairs were roasting something over a fire. But otherwise, the place felt abandoned. No ranger shack, no gate, just an old wooden sign, half swallowed by vines. I parked the van with its nose toward the lake, leveled it with blocks, and set out my folding chair. The air had that sharp evening coolness and the water was so still it seemed poured from glass. What pulled me in wasn't its calm, but its reflection. Even before full dark, when the sun was only a dull ember behind the trees, something was right. I noticed something was wrong. The sky above me was faint blue-gray, with a strip of amber on the horizon. But the lake was already black, not with shadows, but with depth. No orange, no soft light, just a lidless expanse, reflecting a night that hadn't come yet. I told myself it was the angle, or that the trees cast it into darkness. I'd been driving all day, my eyes were tired. I busied myself with lighting the propane stove, frying onions and sausage in the little skillet that left the van, smelling both homely and greasy. I cracked a beer, ate with the slider door open, and let the cool air drift in. For a while, I ignored the water. But I couldn't help glancing at it. That's the curse of still lakes. You end up watching them, even when you don't mean to. By the time the campfires down the line had burned low, I saw the first real difference. There were no stars in the lake. The sky above me was freckled with them, sharp points scattered across the clearing. But the water showed only shifting streaks, as if something moved just beneath the surface. Not fish, not the wind, more like shadows that never settled, brushing against one another like ink dissolving in water. I sat there, beer in hand, and my chest tightened. I remembered once when I was a kid, swimming in a quarry lake, feeling the weeds wrap around my ankle. That sudden animal panic, thrashing until I was free. Looking at the lake now, that memory returned in full weight, like the air itself pressing down. A splash from the far side made me flinch. I told myself it was a loon, or maybe a muskrat. Nothing strange. But when I looked back to the water's surface, I saw ripples bending outward, yet the sky reflected on the surface didn't break. No shimmer, no distortion. The shadows beneath kept shifting, untouched by the splash. That was when I should have left. Just turned the ignition, driven out, found another place under an ordinary sky, but leaving never feels reasonable in the moment. Fear tricks you into sitting still, into waiting for proof. Instead, I zipped my jacket, put the empty beer on the van step, and walked closer to the shore. The earth was soft, littered with needles. A thin mist began to drift across the lake, crawling low, as if the water breathed. The reflection showed it first. Not the sky above me, but something in the water's version of it, a faint glow, moving, like lanterns swinging far in the distance. I looked up, nothing but black trees against star-pricked sky. Looked down, those strange lights still bobbing in the lake's surface. They weren't steady, they pulsed, slow and uneven, like heartbeats. I whispered to myself, it's nothing, just headlights from the road. But there was no road, just forest stretching miles. I don't remember deciding to speak, but my voice slipped out into the quiet. Hello? The ripples widened as though something under the water had stirred. My throat locked. And yet, I didn't run. I crouched, knees popping, inches from the water, staring into that wrong sky. For a moment, I swore I saw myself in it, not the way you see yourself in a mirror, but as if I was standing inside that other version of night. my outline smaller, across the surface. But it wasn't doing what I was doing. It was facing away. I stumbled back, heart lurching so hard I nearly dropped to the ground. My reflection in the real sense, the one on the water's skin, was gone. Only that shadow of me in the false sky remained, unmoving, its back turned. A branch snapped behind me. I spun, expecting the couple from the RV or maybe a raccoon. But the clearing was empty, just my van with its interior light glowing pale. The sound came again, closer this time, crunching underfoot, slow and deliberate. My scalp prickled. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't flash a light. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was too dry. "Who's there?" I asked, louder than I meant. My voice shook. The sound stopped, and in that sudden silence the lake gave another ripple. I looked back and saw that the shadows in its sky had shifted into shapes, not random anymore, not streaks. They looked like figures, standing shoulder to shoulder, indistinct but unmistakably human. That was the first time I felt real dread, not unease, not nerves, but dread like a hand closing around my lungs. I backed toward the van, never turning fully, the fumbling in my pocket for the keys. When I reached the slider door, I yanked it shut with a slam that echoed like a gunshot in the still air. I locked it, then locked the front doors, then sat in the driver's seat with the key trembling in my hand. For long minutes, I did nothing. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there with the dome light buzzing overhead, staring at the windshield, waiting for a face to press against the glass. Nothing came. The silence grew heavier. My pulse slowed, enough that I could hear my own breathing again. I told myself I was imagining it all. I'd been tired. Maybe I'd dozed in the chair and dreamed the whole thing. That was the only explanation. But when I finally gathered the nerve to look out through the windshield at the lake, the truth hollowed me out. The sky above was still sharp with stars. The lake reflected none of them. Instead, it showed only a thick, starless dark. And in the middle of that other sky, my reflection still stood, back turned, unmoving. And now there were others beside it. I pressed my palm flat against the steering wheel, feeling its familiar ridges under my skin, as if grounding myself in something real could keep me tethered. My breath fogged the glass faintly, and for a moment I thought I saw the fog mirrored outside too. Like something was leaning in, breathing back. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. Just the pale glow of the van's interior light and the black silhouette of pines. But the lake was still there, waiting. I couldn't help it. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. My reflection, the one in that false sky on the water, hadn't moved. But now there were more figures around it, indistinct, like silhouettes cut from smoke. They weren't reflections of anything above me, because the real night sky was clear and sharp. They belonged only to that wrong world the lake wanted me to see. I counted them under my breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. My throat closed halfway through 5. They weren't just standing, they were angled slightly as if turned toward me, watching. I shoved the key into the ignition, desperate for the relief of an engine's growl, the comfort of something mechanical, predictable. But the van only gave a sharp click. Then another. The dash lights glowed faintly and died, dead. The panic that followed wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and crushing. My body went cold, my fingers numb as I tried the ignition again and again. Each click felt softer, like the van itself was fading, giving up on me. I wanted to scream, but sound felt dangerous, like it would invite something closer. So I sat, chest heaving, my hand still on the key. Then came the knock. It wasn't at the door or the glass. It came from underneath. A dull, hollow tap that vibrated up through the floor of the van. I jerked my feet up onto the seat instinctively, eyes wide. Another tap followed, sharper, like knuckles on metal. Then silence. I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from making a sound. Every muscle screamed to run, but where? Into the woods? Toward the water that lied? There was nowhere safer than the thin shell of metal and canvas I already sat in. The tapping came again, slower this time. 3 knocks, then stillness. I don't know how long I stayed frozen like that, perched on the driver's seat with my knees to my chest. My eyes burned from not blinking, and every shift in the trees outside made my gut lurch. The couple at the other end of the campground had gone silent. No voices, no fire crackle. It was as though the world had folded down to just me, the van, and that lake. Finally, I forced myself to breathe, to think. I had flashlights, a flare kit. My phone, though there was no service this far north. I whispered the list to myself like a prayer. Tools, things, anchors to reality. I reached across to the glove box, opened it carefully, and pulled out the big mag light I kept there. The weight of it in my hand steadied me, even though part of me knew it was as useless as a twig against whatever pressed in around me. I clicked it on. The beam cut across the clearing, slicing the mist, painting the pines in harsh white. For a moment, I saw nothing but trunks and empty fire rings. I let out a shaky breath. Then I swung the light toward the lake. The surface reflected it wrong. Instead of bouncing back, the beam seemed to sink into the water, swallowed whole. The figures in that false sky glowed faintly, as if the flashlight had illuminated them instead. I froze, breath caught halfway as one of them, one of those shadow shapes, lifted an arm. Slowly, pointing, not at my reflection, not at the water, at me. The light flickered in my hand, sputtered, then died. Just like that, I was back in darkness, the van's interior dim against the wide night. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled for the sliding door, fumbling with the lock. Panic drove me more than reason. If the van was dying, I couldn't stay trapped inside it. I yanked the handle, shoved the door open, and the cool air slapped me hard in the face. The clearing was silent. My breath came out ragged, misting in front of me. I stepped down onto the pine needles, every sense straining. The world felt brittle, like the wrong sound would shatter it. For reasons I still can't explain, my eyes went to the couple's RV at the far end. Their campfire was gone, but a faint light glowed from inside. I told myself I'd walk toward it, find someone human, someone who could tell me I wasn't unraveling. I kept my maglite clutched tight even though it was dead, more a club than a lamp now. Each step felt too loud. The ground cracked softly beneath me, the mist curled around my ankles, and the lake lingered at my side, pulling at my vision. I refused to look. Not at first. But when I reached the halfway point across the clearing, I faltered. Curiosity and dread are cruel twins. They pull you apart until you break. I turned. The lake had changed again. The reflection wasn't of the night at all now. It was daytime, bright and wrong, a sky pale and cloudless, but with no sun. My reflection and the others stood in it like silhouettes burned into film. And then, slowly, one of them stepped forward, not on the water, not breaking the surface, but inside the reflection, drawing closer as if the false world had depth. It moved toward me with deliberate calm. My chest seized, and I stumbled backward. My heel caught a root, and I went down hard on my side. Pine needles stuck to my jacket, the air punched out of me. By the time I pushed up to my elbows, the reflection figure had drawn nearer, its shape sharper now. Not quite human, too long in the arms, a head tilted at a wrong angle, like it had studied people and gotten the imitation just slightly off. And then the air changed. Not the water, not the trees, the air itself. It grew heavier, as though every molecule carried weight, pressing against my skin. My ears popped, and a low hum trembled through the clearing, so deep I felt it in my chest cavity more than I heard it. I scrambled to my feet, half running, half lurching toward the couple's RV. The glow from its window was steady, inviting, and I clung to it like a lifeline. My hand slapped the metal side, then pounded on the door. "Hello? Please, open up. Please." Silence. I pounded again, harder this time, so desperate my knuckles stung. "I need help. Something's wrong at the lake. Please." The light inside flickered. For the first time, I saw movement through the thin curtains, a figure shifting, coming closer. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining everything. But then the curtain twitched aside, and the face that looked out wasn't the man I'd seen earlier. It wasn't anyone I recognized at all. It was my own. For a second, my mind refused to accept what I was looking at. The curtain had drawn back only a few inches, but it was enough. My own face stared at me, washed in the weak yellow glow of the RV's interior. Same sharp jaw. Same lines at the corners of the eyes. Same shallow scar above the right eyebrow, a reminder from a bicycle crash when I was 12. But it wasn't me. It couldn't be. I was outside, gasping in the night air, knuckles stinging from pounding on the door. And yet there I was inside, eyes wide but flat like glass marble set in a mask. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. A strangled sound caught in my throat. The curtain slid shut, the glow dimming back to stillness. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. I wanted to scream, but sound felt too fragile. So I just stood there, swaying on my heels until the silence pressed so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Then the RV door creaked. It opened only an inch at first, spilling a sliver of light across the needles. My breath froze in my chest. I gripped the useless flashlight tighter, holding it like a weapon. The hinge groaned again as the door widened. No one stepped out. The interior light glowed, the same dull yellow. The shadow of someone moved inside, blurred like a shape caught behind frosted glass. And then from the open crack, I heard my own voice. "Why did you come here?" It wasn't a question spoken in panic or anger. It was flat, almost gentle, but cold in its emptiness. My voice, but drained of life. I couldn't answer. My throat worked uselessly, a dry rasp all that came out. The shadow inside the RV tilted its head as if waiting. Then, slowly, the door creaked wider still until I could see the narrow hall leading inside. Empty. No figure. No one waiting. Just my own voice, softer now. "Come in." I backed away so fast I nearly fell. The lake was at my side again, drawing the corner of my vision, but I couldn't look at it now. The reflection in the window had shattered me in a way I hadn't thought possible. My skin crawled with the sense that I was already split, already seen, already copied. I turned and bolted, not back toward my van, not toward the road. I didn't even think about direction. My boots thudded over earth and roots, lungs burning, the mist clawing at my legs as I tore into the tree line behind the campground. Branches whipped my face, needles scraped my arms, but I didn't stop. Every few strides, I swore I heard something following. A soft crunch, a rustle. Once, I even thought I heard my name whispered, carried low through the trees, not shouted. Whispered, as though whoever spoke it didn't need volume to reach me. Daniel. Hearing my name was worse than hearing nothing. My chest seized, and I pushed harder, crashing through brush, desperate to leave the lake behind. But the forest wasn't safe either. I don't know when I first noticed, but the moonlight between the branches wasn't right. At first, it seemed like simple disorientation, like maybe the canopy shifted and I'd lost track of where the clearing was. But then I realized the moonlight didn't match. It fell at wrong angles, sometimes brighter in front of me than above. And when I finally dared to look up through the branches, I felt my stomach drop. The sky above the trees was gone, not clouded, not hidden, gone. In its place was that same starless black I'd seen on the lake, stretched wide, as if the reflection had spilled upward into the real world. The branches cut against it like veins across a dark screen. My knees buckled, and I staggered to one side, slamming into a trunk just to steady myself. And then I saw them, between the trees, motionless at first, like stumps or broken logs. But as my eyes adjusted, I made out their outlines, the same long-limbed shapes I'd seen in the water's reflection, standing too still, heads cocked at strange tilts, one arm too long, one shoulder too low. Dozens of them, spaced like sentries in the fog. I wanted to collapse, curl into the earth and vanish, but something in me, maybe stubbornness, maybe terror, kept me moving. I pressed back against the tree, slid along it until I could break into another run. The shapes didn't move, not at first, not until I turned my back. The instant I did, I heard them. A soft, collective shifting, like leaves dragged in wind. I spun, lightheaded, and they were closer, not rushing, just nearer, as though the distance between us had folded without them taking a step. I ran blind, my lungs screamed, my knees jolted with every strike of root and rock beneath me. The forest was endless, the same trunks repeating, the same black canopy above, and then, I don't know how, I burst into another clearing. Not the campground, not the road, a different place altogether. The ground here was damp, spongy, covered in moss that sucked at my boots, and at its center, reflecting pale even without light, was another pool of water, smaller than the lake. Still and wrong. It didn't reflect anything at all, not sky, not trees. It was a circle of black so dense it seemed carved into the earth, a hole that only pretended to be water. I froze at the edge, gasping, every instinct in me screaming to back away. But my body was drained, hollowed out by fear and distance. I teetered there, staring into the pit-dark surface. Something stirred within it. Not a ripple, not a fish, a shape rising, slow and deliberate. My heart climbed into my throat as I realized it was a hand, pale, too pale, slick with black water that clung like tar. Fingers spread, reaching upward. I stumbled back, tripping, falling hard on my palms. The moss sucked wet against me, the smell of rot rising. My chest heaved as another hand broke the surface, then another. And then a face, my own again. But this time, it wasn't flat or mask-like. It was alive, eyes wide and wet, mouth open in a silent scream, as though I were drowning in that pool and breaking through to meet myself. I scrambled backward, clawing at the earth, boots slipping in the muck. The other me clawed higher, shoulders breaching, water sheeting down. The air around me thickened again, that low hum thrumming until my skull rattled. I think I blacked out for a moment, or maybe time just folded, because the next thing I remember is lying in the moss, chest heaving, the pool empty again. No figure, no reflection, just black water still as glass. And from the tree line around the clearing, those long-limbed shapes had drawn closer, dozens now, maybe more. I couldn't count. They stood silent, waiting as if herding me toward the pool. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and whispered to no one, to myself, to the dark. I'm not going in, I'm not. But my voice broke, and in the silence that followed, the pool began to ripple as if answering. The ripples widened, slow at first, like breath spreading across the pool. Each circle seemed too perfect, too deliberate, as though someone unseen controlled them. The air pressed harder against me, heavy in my chest. My knees buckled and I staggered one step back, then another, but there was nowhere to go. The long-limbed figures ringed the clearing like statues. They didn't move. They didn't need to. Their stillness was worse than any pursuit. The pool began to change. The black surface lightened, not into water, not into reflection, but into something like glass smeared with ash. Shapes swirled beneath, faint at first, then sharpening. It was me. Again, not one reflection this time. Many. Dozens of me pressed against the underside of that glassy surface, palms splayed, mouths open in silent cries. Some were younger versions, my high school face, gaunt and acne-pitted. Others were older, lined with gray streaking the beard I didn't yet have. They clawed, their movements frantic, their eyes wild. I staggered, clutching my chest, bile rising in my throat. It felt like looking into all the versions of myself I'd never been, pressed like specimens into the dark. No, I whispered, shaking my head so hard my teeth rattled. This isn't real. This isn't. But the pool shifted again, as if to correct me. The faces grew sharper, more desperate. Their mouths began to move in unison. I couldn't hear words, but I could feel them inside me, reverberating against my bones. They weren't pleading. They weren't begging. They were warning. The air thickened, humming louder, vibrating through my ribs. My ears filled with pressure until I thought my head would split. I dropped to my knees, clutching my skull, eyes watering. The ground beneath me pulsed faintly, as if the earth itself were breathing. And then the pool cracked. Not like ice, not like glass. More like the surface of reality itself gave way. Thin, jagged lines spread across it, glowing faint white, and through them spilled a light so sharp it stabbed at my eyes. The sound that came with it was not a sound at all, but the absence of it. Silence so deep it felt like my heartbeat had been muted. The figures around the clearing tilted their heads in unison, watching, waiting. I wanted to run, but there was no direction left. Every path led back to them. And in that moment, an old truth I'd buried long ago clawed its way back to the surface of my mind. I'd seen this place before, not in reality, not exactly, but in a dream I'd had as a kid, one that haunted me for years. I used to wake screaming, drenched in sweat, after visions of standing at the edge of a black pool surrounded by shadows. My mother would hold me until the tremors passed, whispering that it was only a dream, nothing more. Eventually the dream stopped, or I convinced myself it had. Until now, until I was standing in it. The cracks in the pool widened. Light bled out in veins, crawling across the moss, searing into the trees. My doubles beneath the surface convulsed, their palms slamming harder against the barrier. I could almost hear them now, voices scraping at the edge of perception. Don't let it out. The words weren't spoken, but they filled my skull. My stomach twisted, bile burning my throat. What was inside that pool wasn't meant to rise. I knew it in my marrow, the way you know not to step off a cliff even if you've never been near one. And yet the cracks spread, a shape swelled behind them, something massive and formless, writhing just beyond the surface. Not me, not human. Something older, something that wore reflections like skins. The ground quaked. The hum rose to a shriek I couldn't hear but could feel tearing through me. I clutched the dead maglite like it could save me, raised it above my head, and for the first time in hours, or maybe my whole life, I screamed, "Stop!" The figures around the clearing froze in their tilts, as if the words startled them. For a heartbeat, the air stilled, the cracks pulsed, then held. I stumbled forward without thinking, drawn to the pool, to the faces pressed against it. My younger self, 16, frightened, eyes wet, locked with mine. His mouth moved again, and this time I could almost hear it. "It wants you." My stomach hollowed out. I fell to my knees at the pool's edge, the moss soaking my jeans, my reflection, my real reflection, staring back at me for the first time all night. Not fractured, not replaced, just me, pale and shaking. For one fleeting second, I thought maybe I could resist it, that if I stood strong, if I held to myself, I could stop whatever waited in the cracks. But then the reflection changed. It smiled, not a weak, nervous smile. A cold one, stretching too wide, the lips cracking at the corners. My own face, but filled with something that wasn't me. My heart stuttered, and I scrambled backward, palms slipping on wet moss. The cracks burst. Light exploded upwards, searing white, blinding me. I covered my face, screaming, but the scream was swallowed, eaten by that impossible silence. The air collapsed inward, pulling everything toward the pool. Needles, leaves, even my breath seemed to drag toward it. My body skidded on the moss, inch by inch, sucked closer to the edge. The long-limbed figures finally moved, not rushing, not chaotic. They stepped forward in perfect rhythm, encircling me tighter, their elongated arms reaching. Not to help, not to harm, to hold me there, to make sure I couldn't escape. I clawed at the ground, nails ripping, dirt filling my mouth as I fought to hold my place. The pull of the pool grew stronger, tugging at my ribs, my gut, as if something inside me wanted to leave my body and sink into it. "No," I choked, spitting soil, tears burning my face. "I'm not yours, I'm not." But the reflection in the pool rose again, towering, my own face stretched, fractured, 100 versions layered together. Its mouth opened wider and wider until it was nothing but darkness. And then I stopped resisting. Not out of choice, out of collapse. My arms gave, my body dragged forward, the moss burning my skin. My face hovered inches from the pool's surface, the smell of iron and rot choking me. The last thing I saw before the world inverted was my reflection leaning up to meet me, smiling still. Then everything went black. At first there was nothing, no sound, no weight, no me. It was like being erased. I drifted in that emptiness, convinced that this was death, or something worse, a space before death, a place where the self was peeled away and forgotten. But then, slowly, sensation bled back in, a hum, faint and low, like the thrum of power lines stretched across an endless plain. A pressure on my chest, like invisible hands keeping me pinned, and then a sound. Breathing. Not mine. I opened my eyes. I was lying on my back inside the Volkswagen. The ceiling panel loomed inches above my face, the faint smell of cedar and grease thick in the air. My sleeping bag was twisted under me, damp with sweat. For a second I thought maybe, it had been a dream, that I had collapsed in the van, mind playing tricks, nightmare spilling into wakefulness. But the window beside me told the truth. Through the glass, the lake shimmered. Still, too still, and it reflected not the sky above but the same endless dark, unbroken by stars. I sat up fast, smacking my head against the ceiling. Pain flared, sharp and grounding. My chest heaved as I scanned the van, stove still folded, gear bag still by the door, flashlight still on the counter where I dropped it. Everything normal. Too normal. Until I saw myself. In the window. Not a reflection. Not the way you catch your face in the glass. This was me, sitting in the van across from me, eyes bloodshot, skin pale, hands folded in his lap. Staring. I froze. My lungs forgot how to work. Slowly, that other me leaned closer to the glass, forehead pressing until the skin flattened against it. His mouth moved, shaping words I couldn't hear. I scrambled backward, nearly tangling in the sleeping bag, slamming into the cabinet. My hands shook so hard I could barely keep upright. The other me didn't flinch. He only mouthed the words again, slower this time. "It's not over," I screamed, a raw sound that filled the van, bounced off the walls, came back at me too loud. My own voice betrayed me, echoing until I hated the sound of it. I clawed for the lock on the slider door, yanked it, shoved it open so hard it rattled. The night air hit me like a wave. Cold, metallic. I stumbled out, bare feet sinking into needles, and spun toward the lake. The water was alive, not rippling, breathing. Each rise and fall like the chest of something massive just beneath. And in its surface, the wrong sky stretched wide, an expanse of shifting shadows, darker than dark. Shapes moved within it, outlines of figures walking, pacing, circling, and among them, me. Hundreds of me, each one doing something different. One knelt, one raised its hands, one ran in place, silent in its desperation. Another stood perfectly still, head tilted back as if laughing. My throat tightened as I scanned them, every possible version of myself, scattered like puppets across that false sky. The air trembled, that hum rising again until my teeth ached. My knees wobbled. I turned toward the forest, half ready to run, but the trees loomed too thick, their trunks warped, bending slightly inward as if they leaned to listen. No way out. The lake gave a sound then. Not a splash, not a ripple. A voice, my voice, but layered, multiplied, warped. A chorus of me speaking at once, each tone sliding over the other until it was impossible to tell where one ended. "You belong here." I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was inside, vibrating against my bones. I staggered, bent double, choking on my own breath. The ground softened beneath me. I looked down and saw water seeping through the needles, black and viscous, swallowing the soil. My toes sank, the cold burning sharp. I tried to pull back, but the suction clung, dragging me inch by inch toward the lake's edge. No, no, no. My voice cracked. I clawed at the ground, hands filling with dirt, nails bending and tearing, but the pull only deepened. My ankles submerged, then my calves, the black water climbing, licking at my skin. The lake wanted me. I could feel it, an intelligence, a hunger, wearing my face, waiting to pull me down into its false world. My body convulsed with terror, every instinct screaming, but my arms were useless against the drag. And then, through the haze of panic, I remembered the flashlight. I don't know why. It was dead, useless. But my hand groped at my side anyway, found it still clipped to my belt. In blind desperation, I yanked it free, raised it high, and slammed my thumb against the switch. Light exploded. Not weak, not flickering, blinding. A beam so sharp it split the mist, cut through the clearing, and struck the lake. The reflection shattered. The false sky split apart, shadows scattering like birds, the versions of me flickering and dissolving into nothing. The lake convulsed, the breathing rhythm breaking into violent spasms, and the suction on my legs snapped like a rope cut loose. I fell backward onto dry needles, gasping, the flashlight still blazing in my grip. The hum was gone. The figures in the trees, gone. The wrong sky, gone. Above me, for the first time that night, I saw stars, real stars, cold and sharp and infinite. I lay there for minutes, maybe hours, the beam of the flashlight stabbing skyward, my chest heaving so hard it hurt. Slowly, the air thinned, the weight lifted. The smell of moss and pine returned, ordinary, almost comforting. But I couldn't shake the words the reflection had mouthed at me in the van window. It's not over. When I finally crawled back inside the Volkswagen, the clock on the dash read 4:17 a.m. The battery was alive again, lights glowing steady. My sleeping bag was still twisted, damp, but the van felt solid, familiar. I locked every door, curled on the bench seat, and waited for dawn. When the first thin line of light crept across the clearing, I stepped out. The lake looked ordinary again, rippling with the wind, catching the blush of sunrise, reflecting the world as it should. But I knew better. I'd seen the other sky. And once you see it, it never leaves you. Morning was never supposed to feel this fragile. I stood barefoot in the dew, my body aching like I'd been worked over in my sleep. The lake rolled gently, kissed by the first hints of sun. Birds called from the canopy, sharp and alive. For a moment, it was almost possible to believe that the night had been a fever dream, that my mind, exhausted and overextended, had conjured shadows from fatigue. Almost. But my ankles still stung where the black water had clutched them, thin red welts spiraling like something had coiled around my legs. And when I shifted my weight, I felt grit lodged under my skin, grains of lakebed sand embedded like splinters. I limped back toward the van. The Volkswagen looked untouched, as if it had slept soundly while I fought for my sanity. Paint dulled by years of road dust, windows smeared with condensation, a comfort I wanted to sink into, but even here unease crept. My reflection lingered in the glass longer than it should, as though the me in the window was a fraction behind, delayed. I didn't dare stare. Inside, the air smelled stale, warm already in the rising heat. I busied myself with motions that felt grounding, firing the stove, boiling water, making coffee in the dented tin percolator I'd hauled across half the country. The hiss and gurgle steadied me. I let the steam sting my face, breathed it deep, and yet each sip tasted faintly metallic, as if some trace of the lake clung to me, seeping into everything I touched. I forced it down anyway. By mid-morning, the campground had begun to stir. From across the pines came voices, families unzipping tents, children whining for breakfast, the slam of a cooler lid, all ordinary sounds. Relief bloomed in my chest like sunlight breaking cloud. I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever I'd endured, daylight had brought witnesses, proximity, reality. I told myself it was over, but I couldn't stop watching the lake, the way it lay so still, like a mirror too perfect to trust. Campers approached its edge, tossing pebbles, wading in up to their shins. I half expected them to vanish, sucked under, but nothing happened. The water rippled and laughed with them. Normal, harmless. I should have left then. Packed up, turned the key, rolled the Volkswagen down the gravel road until the pines thinned and the sky widened. But instead I lingered. Maybe it was pride, maybe disbelief. I needed to see if daylight truly held it at bay. By noon, the sun was fierce overhead, burning the dew off leaves, turning the metal roof of the van hot to the touch. I retreated inside, windows cranked wide, and stretched out on the bench with the fan pointed at me. My eyes burned with fatigue. I hadn't slept more than scraps. The hum of cicadas swelled like static, and exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke, it was to silence. No birds, no cicadas, just stillness thick enough to choke on. The light through the window was dimmer than it should have been. Late afternoon, muted, the sun veiled by high, unbroken clouds. And then I noticed it. The air inside the van felt wrong, too heavy. My chest rose, but each breath scraped like the atmosphere itself resisted me. Slowly, dread tightened its grip as I turned toward the window. The lake was reflecting again, but not the sky above. This time it wasn't shadows, it wasn't the endless dark, it was me. Only me. The surface was crowded with my face, stretched across every inch of water like shattered glass. Hundreds of versions all gazing upward, their eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. Some faces blurred, melting at the edges as though they'd been submerged too long. Others twitched, lips moving in broken rhythm. And then they all turned. Not toward the forest, not toward the campers, toward me. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering, but I couldn't look away. My own faces followed me, hundreds of pairs of eyes tracking as one, their mouths forming words. No sound carried, but I knew. You let us in. I pressed a hand against the wall, nails digging into the thin paneling. My breath tore ragged from my throat. Outside, a father laughed, tossing a frisbee to his daughter. He couldn't see it. The reflection was mine alone. Panic clawed up my spine. I yanked open the van door, bolted into the heat, my feet pounding the gravel. My voice ripped from me before I could stop it. Do you see it? The father froze mid-throw, staring at me with startled confusion. The frisbee dropped into the dust. His daughter clutched his leg. What are you talking about? He called, wary. I swung my arm toward the water, shouting, The lake! Look at the lake! He followed my gesture, squinting at the surface, his brow furrowed, then softened into something between pity and unease. It's just water, he said. My pulse spiked. No, it wasn't just water. The faces writhed, pressing against the surface as if desperate to break free, their movements jagged, desperate. I staggered closer to the father, my voice shaking. You don't see it? You don't see them? He wrapped an arm around his daughter, pulling her back a step. Maybe you should get some rest, man. His voice was kind, but his eyes darted. Uncomfortable. They couldn't see it. Only me. And that was worse than if the whole campground screamed at once. I backed away, trembling, every instinct screaming that the lake wanted me isolated, that if no one else could witness it, then no one else could save me. The faces rippled harder now, mouths gaping wider, the shimmer of their teeth catching in the dim light. I spun and ran, not toward the water, not toward the trees, toward the Volkswagen, the only cage that was mine, the only shell that had carried me across so many miles. I slammed the door shut behind me, chest heaving, hands shaking as I twisted the key in the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, roared to life. Relief surged, thin but real. I had to leave. I jammed the gear, wheels spitting gravel, steering hard down the narrow road that snaked from the campground. Pines blurred past, the path climbing, then dipping. The lake receded behind me, hidden by trees. My heart hammered so loud it drowned the rattle of the van. But in the corner of the windshield, where the sky should have been reflected, I saw it again. Not clouds, not trees, my own face. Watching me drive. The road wound like a scar through the trees, gravel popping under the tires, the steering wheel trembling in my grip. My eyes flicked between the windshield and the mirrors, desperate for any sign that the lake wasn't following me. Pines blurred, sky dimmed. The air grew thick with the smell of hot brakes and pine sap, but the reflection clung. Every pane of glass inside the Volkswagen carried it, my own face staring back, slightly delayed, slightly wrong. Not the quick glances you get in a mirror, not the natural bounce of movement. These reflections lingered. My head would turn, but the me in the glass would lag behind, eyes lingering where mine had been, lips curling into an expression I hadn't made. I adjusted the rearview mirror, trying to angle it down, but the face leaned forward as if eager not to be dismissed. Not over, it mouthed. My grip tightened on the wheel. Shut up, I muttered, voice cracking. You're not real. The reflection's lips twitched, and then, impossibly, I heard it. A whisper, thin as breath leaking through the vents. Not over. My throat closed. I slammed the mirror upward so it showed only ceiling. But that didn't save me. The side mirrors pulsed with the same face. The windshield shimmered faintly with its grin. Even the chrome trim around the radio caught the curve of its mouth. The Volkswagen, my trusted companion across thousands of miles, had become a cage of mirrors. I pushed harder on the gas, the old engine groaning in protest. The road widened briefly, the trees thinning, and I saw a sign half hidden by brush. State Highway 43. 2 miles. 2 miles. 2 miles, and I'd be on real pavement with traffic and exits and distance. I whispered it like a prayer, each syllable scraping past my lips. 2 miles. 2 miles. But the van began to fight me. The wheel twitched in my hands, subtle at first, then stronger, pulling me toward the right, toward the shoulder that dropped steep into the woods. I yanked it back, tendons straining in my arms. The reflection in the windshield was grinning wide now, teeth bared. We'll take the turn for you. No. My voice tore raw. I slammed my palm against the dash. You don't get to drive. You don't get to take this. The hum returned then, the one I'd heard in the clearing, the vibration that shook through my bones. It filled the van, rattling the loose bolts in the glove box, buzzing against the glass. My teeth ached from it. The Volkswagen lurched, engine coughing, speed dropping. 40. 30. The road tilted downhill, but the van dragged as if the air itself had thickened into tar. I screamed at it, begged, pounded the steering wheel until my palms burned. Go, just go. And then, suddenly, the engine caught, roaring alive. The van surged forward, nearly throwing me against the seatbelt. I gripped the wheel and didn't dare breathe until I saw the glint of highway signs through the trees. I burst onto the asphalt like a drowning man breaking surface. The van steadied. The hum faded. Cars whooshed past in both directions, oblivious. Civilization blessed and indifferent. I told myself I was safe. I repeated it like a mantra as I merged, tires humming steady on the road. Safe. But I didn't look in the mirrors. Not once. Hours passed, the sky shifted from gray to gold to the bruised edge of evening. I drove until my eyes blurred, until the Volkswagen trembled under the strain of miles. Rest areas blurred past, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I'd see them again. When the fuel gauge dipped near empty, I finally pulled into a small-town gas station, just a couple of pumps beneath buzzing fluorescents, a shop selling candy and maps. I filled the tank with shaking hands, refusing to glance at the van's windows, refusing to see myself in the darkened glass. Inside the shop, the cashier eyed me warily. I must have looked wrecked, shirt soaked, hair plastered, eyes red. You okay, man? He asked, bagging my bottle of water and a pack of crackers. Long drive, I rasped. My throat was shredded as if I'd been screaming for hours. Maybe I had. Back at the van, I paused. The windshield reflected the station's lights, the pumps, the dark sky above. Just that. No faces, no delay. I exhaled shakily. Maybe, just maybe, it had ended at the lake. Maybe distance had broken whatever tether it had on me. I drove again, back onto the highway, miles slipping beneath the tires. Night thickened. Stars scattered sharp across the sky. My eyelids grew heavy. At last, with nothing but open roads stretching ahead, I pulled into a rest area and parked beneath the glow of a single lamp. Inside the van, I collapsed onto the bench seat, not even bothering to unroll the sleeping bag. The Volkswagen ticked and cooled around me, smelling of metal and heat. My body sank. For the first time in days, sleep dragged me fast and deep. But it didn't save me. I woke in the dark hours to a sound that froze my blood. Knuckles. Rapping on glass. 3 sharp knocks on the windshield. My breath caught. I lay perfectly still, heart jackhammering, sweat cold on my temples. The silence stretched long, then again. 3 knocks. Patient. Insistent. I forced myself upright, every muscle trembling, and looked toward the windshield. My face stared back. Not distorted this time. Not screaming. Calm. Smiling. Its lips moved slow enough for me to read. Switch seats. The words on the glass chilled me more than the knocks had. Switch seats. My reflection leaned closer, its breath fogging the windshield from the inside, though I knew it wasn't in here. My body shook, every nerve telling me to look away, to shut my eyes, to bury my head under the blanket and pretend. But I couldn't, because deep down, part of me wanted to listen. The van had carried me across deserts, mountains, plains. It had been my companion when no one else was. But now, staring at that version of myself pressed to the glass, I realized what the truth had been whispering all along. The Volkswagen wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never had been. The reflection's hand lifted and tapped the glass. 1, 2, 3. An impatient rhythm. Get out, I whispered. Get out of my van. Its smile widened. The air inside shifted, heavier, as though someone had opened a door to a cave and let the stale breath of the earth inside. The mirrors along the side doors shimmered. Reflections bloomed in them too, faces stacked in layers, each with a different expression, grinning, weeping, screaming, yawning silently. My own face multiplied into infinity. The walls of the van pulsed faintly, the thin metal skin bending inward like lungs. Switch seats. The The words weren't mouthed anymore. They filled the space, layered voices vibrating the panels, crawling under my skin. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound lived inside my bones. My own jaw began to move, teeth clicking, lips shaping the words without my permission. I bit down hard until I tasted blood, desperate to stop myself from speaking with them. The keys sat in the ignition, dull silver catching the rest area light through the windshield. The message was clear. They didn't just want my seat. They wanted my hands on the wheel, my eyes in the mirror, my breath inside the van. They wanted to drive through me. No, my voice cracked. I'm not giving it to you. The windshield shuddered. A fracture spidered from the corner, racing across the glass. Another crack split from the rear window. Tiny shards rained down from the dome light like glittering frost. The faces in the mirrors pressed harder, skin flattening grotesquely against the glass, their mouths opening wider until their jaws seemed ready to split. Switch seats. The chant rose, building, hundreds of my voices layered into one roar. I lunged for the flashlight, my last weapon, clutched it in both hands, and thumbed the switch. Nothing. Dead. The laughter that followed wasn't one sound, but many versions of me cackling, wheezing, gasping in delight. They fed off my failure. The van groaned as though its frame bowed under their mirth. Desperation clawed at me. My eyes landed on the side door. Freedom was 3 feet away. I could run, leave the van behind, flee into the night, but the thought cut me deeper than fear, because leaving meant admitting it was theirs now, and I wasn't ready to give them that. Not yet. With a roar that scraped my throat raw, I slammed my fist against the dash. "This is my van!" The laughter stopped. Silence hung sharp, broken only by my ragged breathing. The reflections leaned closer, waiting. I grabbed the wheel, knuckles white. "You want it?" I spat, voice trembling. "Then drive through me." The van shuddered violently, like something massive had landed on its roof. The seat beneath me bucked. The smell of stagnant water filled the air, searing my nostrils, filling my lungs until I gagged. The windshield went black, not cracked, not broken, just black, like the wrong sky had bled across it. The hum rose again, deafening, vibrating through my bones, every nerve burning. The reflections screamed in unison, mouths stretching wide, their agony or joy splitting my skull. And then, silence. The van sat still beneath the lamp. The windshield showed only the night outside, the highway lights flickering faintly. The mirrors reflected nothing but the dim interior. Gone. I sat frozen, chest heaving, the van started smoothly. The feeling felt steady. The night was overnight. There was stillness. Truth settled. Heavy. I hadn't heard them. I had invited them in. My outburst hadn't cast them away. It had given them permission. I felt it. A pressure beneath my skin. A faint delay in my thoughts. Like someone else's hands. Subtle. Almost noticeable. Almost. I drove out of the restaurant. It started humming beneath me like it always had, steady and faithful. The highway stretched endless ahead, and for anyone passing, I must have looked like any other late-night traveler. Just a man in his van, headed somewhere. But in the glass, sometimes, my reflection still lags. A fraction of a second behind, smiling when I'm not. I rolled into Sable just before sundown, the kind of hour that makes every edge look softer and every shadow look deeper. The Volkswagen's engine heat wavered up through the rear vents, that warm oil smell threading with dust. The town was a smudge on the map, a loop of streets that didn't seem to agree with the satellite image saved on my phone. On paper, Sable had one main drag and a makeshift grid. On the screen, that grid bent into a loop that didn't quite close, like a mouth holding back whatever it wanted to say. The RV park sat at the edge of that hesitation, a rectangle of gravel outlined by creosote and ocotillo, a chain of power pedestals leaning like tired shoulders. A hand-painted board over the office read, "Echo Dunes RV." It should have felt welcoming. A place to water down the dust, level up, let the van breathe. But my knuckles stayed tight on the wheel, as I eased past the empty laundromat and the ice machine that coughed every few seconds like it remembered having lungs. I'd found the park through a link that no longer worked. Someone had written a blog post a couple years back about small-town RV parks you'll regret, a list half cautionary, half travel brags. The post had vanished this spring. The cached version was blank, just a single caption that had slipped through the erasure. The desert echoes, but not always in the direction you expect. I didn't know why that line hooked into me the way it did. Maybe because I was driving to forget people, a job that I believed would look smaller if the horizons got bigger. Maybe because I kept waking up with the feeling that I'd left something on, a stove burner of memory whispering through the walls. You tell yourself a trip will cool things to the touch. You don't plan to put your hand on a door you can't open. The office door pushed in with that spring bell note you only hear in towns like this. The air inside was 20 degrees older, heavy with coffee that had burned down to tar and the crisp, sour smell of old paper. A floor fan stuttered. On the corkboard, a child's drawing of a lighthouse whose beam didn't reach the sea at all but pointed inland, pencil rays slanting across pine trees and a ridgeline. I stared longer than I should have, trying to place why I recognized the angle of that beam, the way it bent, like it was turning back on itself. The manager was the sort of woman who looked like she could lift your van if you ditched it in the wash. Gray hair caught back, an RV parts catalog curled in her hand. "You're late for the heat," she said without hello, like time had a schedule none of us were following. "You'll want a spot on the east fence. Less hum from the line." "What line?" My voice came out softer than I meant it to. "You calibrate your volume when you've been alone a while." She jerked her chin. "Power towers out north. They sing when the wind's crosswise. You'll hear it even with the radio off." I signed the little register book with its columns and check marks. The names on the page above mine had been rubbed with a finger while the ink was still damp. They blurred into themselves, a smear of people I couldn't read. When I looked up, she already had the park map folded toward me. 24 sites in a precise loop, little boxes like calendar days. She tapped a nail on spot 12. "You get this one," she said. "Emergency water spigot behind the laundry. Don't use it unless your tank hooked air." "Got it." She pushed something across the counter. A thin brass token the size of a nickel, stamped with a single zero. The edges were worn smooth by other hands. I held it between my fingers and felt how cool it was, like it had been submerged in a jar on a back shelf just to hold the temperature of whatever room it used to remember. "What's this for?" "Laundry," she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted like she knew it wasn't a complete answer. "And the ice machine if it jams. It won't jam if you're patient, but nobody is." I slid the token into my pocket. "Any trails?" I asked. I always ask. Moving on foot makes places feel less like decisions and more like time you let happen to you. "There's a ridge," she said. "Looks close. It's not. Folks go anyway. The map makes it look straighter than it is." She glanced at the corkboard and its lighthouse, the inland beam. "You're not the first to get turned around by paper." Outside, the wind had shifted. The power lines did hum, a note just under hearing, the way a word tries to form before the mouth opens. I drove to Site 12, eased the van onto the pad. When the tires let go of the gravel, the whole van sighed like the day had been holding its breath. I killed the engine. The silence wasn't. Static lay over everything. Not loud, just present, like air with texture. Hookups were clean. The pedestal was newer than the rest of the park, a bright plastic door that clicked shut like it was happy to be touched. I ran my hand along the van's side in the habit I pretend is about checking paint, but is really about anchoring myself to something weighty and mine. Through the open slider, heat pooled inside the van, trapped by the insulation I used to be proud of. I started the little fan by the spice rack and felt the air shift from still to almost still. The east fence was chain link. and on the other side of it, the scrub rose and fell in waves, the kind of terrain that makes you think you can see everything until you realize you can't. A coyote moved through it like it belonged to a different depth of the field. I took out my folding chair and set it near the door. Sunset smeared a color over sable that I don't have a name for. Rust pulled to candy, like an old bruise evaporating. I poured water into the kettle and clicked the stove on. The little propane hiss set off the part of my brain that monitors risk. Alone makes every sound a decision. A breeze came through the slider. It should have smelled like dust and hot metal. Instead, I got this faint metallic sweetness, like cold pennies clinking in a jar. It made my tongue feel thick. It made me think of a dentist's office when I was a kid, the taste that isn't blood but makes you swallow like it might be. I told myself it was the ice machine coughing up a cube, but that the odor of cheap refrigeration was drifting strange in the heat. I told myself the kettles in small-town RV parks all sound the same. I reached for the kettle anyway, just to prove there was heat where there ought to be heat. The water went from rattle to boil, and every bounce of the lid sounded 1 microsecond too late, as if the echo of the lid's click got here before the click. I shut it off. My heart took the sound personally. My phone had enough bars to resemble a promise. I pulled up the offline map of the area to plan a morning walk. The trail to the ridge was a faint beige line, running north then east then north again, a purposeful, don't waste steps kind of path. When I zoomed out and back in, the line shifted a little. Nothing dramatic, barely a jitter. But then the path had a kink, just a notch off the corner of the laundry building. When I walked over there to check it against reality, there was nothing but a clear rectangle of gravel and a dead patch where someone had parked too long. The map showed a narrow cut in the fence. The fence had no cut. I ran my fingers along the links until my knuckles touched heat, and when I looked back at the map, the notch was gone. I'm not superstitious. I'm not fragile. But I have learned to listen to the feeling that keeps you from stepping where the ground might give. I took 3 deep breaths, and the air felt colder with each one, the opposite of what it should have been. By the third, sweat prickled on my forearms, even though the goose flesh had started up, a confused conversation between systems. The fan in the van set its glove of air on my skin. Someone's TV down the row burbled game show laughter, but the sound came from the wrong direction. I turned my head. The laughter pointed at the laundromat. The laundromat was dark. That's when the wind said my name. It didn't creep up to it. It didn't roar. It just fitted itself into that hum from the power line, into the leftover space after the kettle's rattle, and in that thin seam I heard the shape of my name the way a radio sometimes catches a driver's voice on the CB, and you can't swear to it later. It came from the fence line. When I faced the fence, the sound put itself behind me. When I turned back to the van, it seemed to come from inside the van. I stood there and let the quiet rearrange itself until the only thing I could trust was my own swallowing. "Wind gets stuck here," the manager had said earlier when she took my cash. She'd said it casually, like commenting on the chance of clouds. "When it's bad, you'll think it's coming from the wrong side of your own head." I made the tea and drank it too hot just to have a task. I ate from a can because cooking would have meant more sound to interpret. The horizon went all the way down, and with it the temperature, and with that a smell like wet concrete rose from the gravel, though there hadn't been rain. I told myself it was the laundry room's gray water being dumped, a city habit clinging to a place that didn't have a city to belong to. Before bed, I walked the loop, counting sites, 24 boxes on the paper map. But on the far side of the laundry, tucked behind the ice machine, there was a concrete pad with old tire marks and a stump of a bent power pedestal, taped off with melted caution tape that read, AUIO lie. The number marker on the little post was blank wood. It had once held a metal tag, 2 nails remained, but the tag was gone, and on the wood someone had pressed a thumb smeared with oil, then traced a small spiral with that thumb. I stood there and felt the faint magnet of places that get used without getting named. I didn't count the pad out loud. I counted it silently. 25. When I got back to the van, I slid the door shut, and the latch sounded one beat too late again. The door had already closed in a version of the night that got here before this one. I lay on the platform bed and stared at the ceiling where the map light made a warm little island on the plywood. On my phone, I tried the broken link again. The page now gave me a different error. Content removed per request. Below that, a single sentence still survived like a seed stuck in a seam. You are facing the ridge. The echo is behind you. I didn't want to test that sentence, so I read it again and told myself it was just a leftover from someone else's drama. I tucked the brass token under the edge of my pillow because I'd forgotten where I'd put it. It felt colder than the rest of the night. I told myself it was the metal. I told myself I believed myself. The van creaked through the night like it was reminding itself how to hold together. I woke more than once, not to noise, but to the absence of it, the kind of stillness that forces every muscle to listen. My ears strained against the fan's weak hum until the static under everything returned, thin as gauze, and I could unclench my fists. I don't remember falling asleep the final time. I just remember waking with the morning sun like a flat slap of gold against the plywood walls. For a moment, it was normal. Coffee burbled. Condensation streaked down the window glass, catching light. A truck out on the highway groaned to life. But when I slid the side door open, the air had that same metallic sweetness, stronger now, as though the whole park had been rinsed in coins. I stepped outside barefoot, feeling the gravels bite, and watched a man 2 rows down fumbling with his sewer hookup. He was older, bent at the waist, hat tugged low. He looked up once, caught my eye, and gave the kind of nod strangers give in places where conversation isn't currency. But then he muttered something, not to me, not to himself either. The words tangled with the power line hum. I could swear he said, "It follows the loop." I started my walk toward the ridge before the heat could pin me down. The path wasn't a trail so much as a suspicion. Tire tracks graying into dirt, patches of bent grass pointing like fingers. Every step away from the fence made the park feel less like an anchor and more like an outline I could forget. Behind me, the chain link shrank to silver thread. The ridge loomed larger, though the space between us didn't close as fast as my stride said it should. The desert has a way of teaching you distance by punishing your assumptions. Half a mile out, I turned to look back. The park should have been a neat box of gravel, pads lined like pages. Instead, I saw the laundry roof and the ice machine hunching like shoulders. But the line of sights didn't make a square. It arced slightly, a crescent bending away from me. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and the next time I looked, the rows looked right again. Only my pulse refused to slow. The wind kept changing its story. One moment it shoved at my back, urging me uphill. The next it pressed against my chest like a palm. Every time it shifted, I swore I heard a syllable in it, not full words, just vowels, round and soft. O, A, E. It sounded like someone trying to remember how to call my name, but failing the consonants. I pressed my hands to my ears once, but the sound didn't vanish. It traveled through me, bone to blood. At the base of the ridge, a weathered sign leaned sideways. It wasn't a trail marker, more like a chunk of old advertisement left for scrap. The letters had worn to shadows, except for a single word burned dark with age: return. I touched the wood and my fingertips came back blackened, like soot, though nothing smelled of fire. I wiped them on my shorts, but the smear ghosted there, faint but refusing to leave. Climbing the ridge felt like climbing time. Every rock seemed older than it should be, older than the desert itself. And as I climbed, I thought about the blog post that had disappeared, the one that had warned about parks like Echo Dunes. I couldn't recall the author's name, though I'd read it twice. What gnawed at me was the idea that maybe I hadn't read it at all. Maybe it had been told to me somewhere else and my brain had filed it away under internet. Maybe the erasure wasn't digital. Maybe it was personal. Halfway up, I stopped. The air dropped cold as though I'd stepped under a shadow, though there were no clouds. And from the hollow below, the laugh track voice rose again, a game show chuckle, warm and synthetic, spilling up the slope. I turned and scanned the park. All the RVs sat quiet. Nobody's TV was on. The sound rolled against the rocks like marbles, and then, sharply, it stopped, as if someone had pressed mute. I didn't climb further. Something in my chest refused. Instead, I crouched, pressed a hand to the soil. It was damp. In the desert, in the heat, under full sun. Damp. And that dampness smelled like wet concrete again, like rain that hadn't fallen. When I pulled my hand away, my palm left an imprint that stayed darker longer than it should have. Walking back felt longer than the climb. My van looked small, folded in on itself, and for a moment I thought I saw it parked in two places at once, my Site 12 and again at the pad behind the laundromat, the one with the oil spiral. I blinked, and it was back to 1. But my breath carried wrong, as though my lungs weren't sure which van I was returning to. The man with the hat was gone. Only his sewer hose remained, connected but slack, like he'd stepped away mid-task and never finished. On his pad, a single shoe lay sideways, the sole ground flat at the heel. No footprints led away in the gravel. Just the shoe, waiting. Back inside the van, I locked the door even though I'd never needed to in towns smaller than gas stations. I poured water into my bottle, lifted it to drink, and froze. The reflection in the stainless steel curve wasn't mine. Not exactly. The face looked back half a beat too slow, eyes wider than they should have been, like the reflection was still catching up to me. I slammed the bottle down. Water leapt across the table and pattered onto the floor, darkening the plywood. The sound of drops echoed sharper than it should, ricocheting in a space too small to allow it. By evening, the park had grown quieter than the desert around it. Lights flickered on in some rigs, but no voices carried, no footsteps shuffled. When I slid the window open for air, I heard the hum of the power lines again, steady, endless, and tucked inside it, a whisper almost identical to the first. My name. Not shouted, not even spoken. Just breathed. And this time, the sound didn't come from outside. It rose from under the van, as if the gravel itself had learned my name. I lay back on the bed and told myself I would leave in the morning. That's all I needed to do. Start the engine, drive until the hum fell behind me. But even as I rehearsed the decision, the brass token under my pillow slid against the wood like it had shifted on its own. I pulled it out, stared at it. The 0 wasn't just an O. Under the lamp's glow, I swore it had thinned into a spiral. The same shape smeared on the blank pad behind the laundromat. The same shape my thumb wanted to trace, without permission. Sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, I dreamed of maps. Trails folding back on themselves, loops tightening until the paper creased. And in the crease, my van parked neatly, engine silent, door closed. But when I tried to open it, my reflection sat inside, smiling, and shook its head once, slowly. Morning should have saved me. It usually does. The sun cuts away night's illusions, the kind you can laugh about when coffee hits your veins. But that day, the morning light felt false, thin, like it had been stretched too far to cover what lay underneath. The gravel outside my van glimmered with dew that shouldn't exist in desert heat, each bead holding a warped reflection of the van itself, hundreds of tiny versions bending back toward me. I brewed coffee, hoping the ritual would steady me. The percolator hissed, filled the van with warmth and the faint scent of burnt grounds, but something beneath it persisted, the metallic sweetness again, sharper now, almost like rust soaked in sugar. I carried the mug outside. A dry wind stirred, and I realized the smell wasn't drifting in. It was seeping up from the gravel pad itself, rising in invisible waves. A few sites down, the old man's rig sat silent. No sewer hose now, no chair, no shoe. Just absence, scrubbed clean like he'd never been there. I rubbed my eyes. The gravel under his sight looked darker, damp like the soil on the ridge, as if something had sweated upward through the ground. I decided to leave. Right then. No ceremony. No, maybe after breakfast. I cranked the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. Relief washed me until I realized the hum hadn't faded with the engine noise. It threaded itself deeper, like static grafted to my hearing. I checked the mirrors. For an instant, the laundry building doubled, one version crooked behind the ice machine, the other standing straight in the sun. I blinked hard, back to one. I pulled toward the park exit. The gravel loop curved past the office. That's when I saw her, the manager, standing by the fence, arms folded. She wasn't watching me leave. She was watching the ridge. Her lips moved, whispering like she was answering something I couldn't hear. Then, without looking my way, she lifted her hand and traced a spiral in the air, one finger turning slow circles. My chest tightened. The exit road narrowed, funneled me toward the highway. But when my tires hit the blacktop, I froze. The highway stretched in both directions, flat, empty. Only, it wasn't. The mile marker ahead read 0, not 19 like it should have, not any number I remembered passing on the way in. Just 0. I gripped the wheel, telling myself I'd misremembered, that highways played tricks, that markers shifted with construction. I drove. 1 mile, 2. Dust rose, then another marker, 0. My heart stuttered. I pressed harder on the gas, the van rattling as if protesting speed. A third marker appeared, still 0. Each one bent slightly left, as though the highway itself was spiraling. Panic cracked open in me. I spun the van around, tires spitting gravel at the shoulder, back through the desert, back towards Sable. The town's shape emerged like a mirage, but as I rolled into its grid, I saw it wasn't a grid at all. Streets bent subtly, every block curving until I realized I was circling the RV park again. Echo dunes. Office, laundry, ice machine, all waiting, unchanged. I parked in a shudder. My hands shook so hard I could barely shut the engine off. From the office door, the bell chimed faintly, though no one had gone in or out. And then I heard the laughter again. The same TV game show chuckle rolling across the gravel. This time it came from the laundromat. Lights flickered inside, even though the windows showed only dark shapes moving behind glass. I didn't go closer. Couldn't. Instead, I stumbled back to the van, locked the door, and pulled the curtains. Inside, air pressed tight, heavy with that metallic sweet scent. The brass token rolled across the counter as though nudged by a hand I couldn't see. It spun, slow, deliberate, until the spiral faced up again. I picked it up, gripped it hard, wanting to fling it out the window. But the moment it touched my skin, a shiver ran through me, like remembering something I'd never lived. A highway exit marked 0. A ridge that never draws nearer. A voice in the wind calling my name. The echoes weren't behind me. They were inside me. That night, I dreamed again. Not of maps, not of trails, of the office corkboard, the lighthouse beam bending inland. Only this time, the beam reached me directly, pinning me where I stood. And behind the beam's glow, in the static hum, my own voice whispered from 100 directions at once, "It follows the loop." I woke gasping, nails pressed deep into my palms, and under the bed, faint but steady, came the sound of gravel shifting, as though someone were pacing in slow circles beneath the van. I didn't sleep after that. I lay rigid, every sense extended, waiting for the footsteps to end. But they didn't. They circled slow, measured, like whoever was under the van had infinite patience. When the sun finally bled into the curtains, the sound stopped, not fading, not retreating. Just gone, like it had folded itself into daylight. I threw the door open fast, trying to catch something in the act. Nothing but gravel, the van's shadow, and my own heartbeat slamming. No footprints. No scuff marks, only a faint spiral traced in the dust, drawn where my tires had sat. I couldn't keep still. I crossed the park, heading for the office. The bell chimed as I pushed the door in, empty. No manager, no coffee smell, just the corkboard, the child's lighthouse drawing gone. In its place, a single sheet of lined paper pinned dead center. On it, in cramped handwriting, "You are in Site 25. My stomach lurched. I hadn't told anyone about that pad behind the laundromat. Nobody should have known I counted it. My fingers itched to pull the note down, but I left it. Some part of me feared it wasn't really there at all, that touching it would smear the ink back into wood grain. When I stepped outside, the world felt subtly rearranged. RVs I swore had been parked straight now leaned at odd angles. The ice machine, once white, seemed tinged yellow, like old teeth. A dog barked far away, echoing too long for the distance. I pressed the keys in my pocket so hard they dug crescents into my skin, grounding myself in the bite of pain. That afternoon, I forced myself to walk the loop again. I passed Site 12, my van sitting obedient, past Site 13, 14. By Site 20, I started whispering numbers under my breath, just to keep track. When I reached the laundromat, I braced myself. The blank pad was still there. This time, though, the caution tape was gone. In its place, a fresh number marker gleamed. 25. I crouched down, heart hammering. The spiral in oil had been redrawn. Perfect, precise, like it had been stamped by machine. I reached toward it. The air above the spiral felt cooler, a pocket of night in broad day. My fingertips hovered, trembling. Then the wind gusted and the spiral blurred. Not wiped away, shifted like liquid rippling. Voices stirred inside it. Not loud, not clear, but there. Layers of whispers, some my tone, some not. I jerked back, nearly falling on the gravel. Behind me, the laundry door creaked. The sound was wrong, one beat late, like the door had already opened somewhere else. I stumbled back to my van, shaking, sweat slicking my arms, locked the door, drew the curtains. Inside, the air was suffocating. The brass token lay on the counter where I'd left it. Only now etched faintly into the spiral, new letters curved along the rim. Return. I don't know how long I sat staring at it. Hours. The sun dragged shadows across the plywood floor. At dusk, the laughter returned, swelling through the park. Game show, warm, false. My chest tightened. Then beneath it, a lower sound rose, a voice threading the static. My name, this time clear, unmistakable, spoken in my own cadence. I pressed my palms over my ears. Still there. Inside, not outside. The brass token rattled across the counter, fell and rolled until it stopped at my foot. Spiral up. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. My only thought was escape. I yanked the ignition. The van roared awake. Headlights cut the dusk, catching the fence line. In their beam, the manager stood again, arms folded, watching. And this time when she lifted her hand, she didn't trace the spiral. She pointed at me, slow and deliberate, and mouthed a single word I couldn't misread. Run. I slammed the gear shift into drive. Gravel spat. The exit road uncoiled. My pulse battered as mile markers flew past. But when I looked at them, everyone still read 0. Over and over, stretching endless, the hum deepened, vibrating my bones. The desert wasn't letting me out. And then the van stuttered, engine choking. The dash lights flickered. I coasted to a halt, tires grinding to silence. Darkness pooled on both sides of the road. Ahead, just at the edge of the headlights, another van sat blocking the lane. Same shape, same color, same stickers on the rear window. My van. The brake pedal sank under my foot. My breath snagged. The door of the other van opened with a sound one beat too late. A figure stepped out. It was me. The headlights carved him into existence. Same jacket, same worn jeans, same scuffed boots I was wearing. I stood there in the beam, face half-shadowed, staring straight into me with a stillness I couldn't mimic if I tried. My own shape, carved wrong. I gripped the steering wheel until the vinyl bit into my palms. He didn't move at first, just stood, head cocked slightly like he was listening to something in the static. Then his lips parted. I braced for words. Instead, the laughter rolled out of him, the same canned game show chuckle that had haunted the park. Hollow, endless, wrong. My body reacted before thought. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, engine shrieking, gravel spitting as I tore backward. But the mirrors showed only black, no shoulder, no desert, just void swallowing the road behind me. My stomach pitched, ears roaring. I jerked the wheel, desperate to swing around, but the van resisted, steering stiff like the tires were glued to a loop I couldn't escape. When I faced forward again, the other van was gone. Only highway stretched ahead, washed pale by my lights. I panted, sweat soaking my collar. For a fragile heartbeat, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe exhaustion had bent the air. Then I saw the shoe. Sitting dead center in the lane, the same old man's shoe I'd seen back at the park, same worn heel. No body, no sign of him, just the shoe, waiting. I swerved to avoid it. Tires shrieked. The van fishtailed, gravel spraying into the dark. My head slammed against the window. By the time I straightened, the shoe was gone. The hum grew louder. It wasn't in the power lines anymore. It was in me. My teeth buzzed, each molar rattling like a tuning fork. The brass token, forgotten in my pocket, pressed hard against my thigh, hotter than skin. I yanked it out. In the dash glow, the spiral seemed deeper now, almost three-dimensional, most as if it could pull me through. And written faintly along its curve, a phrase I hadn't seen before. It follows the loop. My vision blurred. I shoved the token back into the glove box, slammed it shut like locking a cage. I needed noise, distraction, anything. I flicked on the radio. Static filled the van, white and sharp. Then, beneath it, a voice broke through. My voice. Reading words I hadn't spoken. The desert echoes, but not always in the direction you expect. My hands shook the wheel. That was the line from the vanished blog post, the one I couldn't stop chasing. Hearing it in my own tone hollowed me out. The radio clicked dead, leaving silence too heavy to breathe. I drove without looking at the mile markers, eyes locked on the wavering horizon. At some point, I must have blacked out. Sleep and wake blurring until the van's shudder jolted me upright. The gas gauge hovered empty. I coasted to a stop. Outside, the desert pressed close. No hum now, no laughter, just stillness, the kind that smothers. I killed the headlights. Darkness swallowed me whole. And in that darkness, the faint crunch of gravel started again, slow circling, steady, like footsteps pacing beneath the van. I sat frozen, every nerve on fire. The van's walls creaked as though leaning inward. The smell of wet concrete rose, thick and sour. And then against the thin metal of the door came a knock. 3 raps, deliberate, human. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The knock came again, louder. Then a voice, my voice, whispered through the seam of the door. Open, you're already inside. The knock lingered in the metal long after it stopped, reverberating through my bones. My breath came shallow, chest seizing against air that felt thinner than it should be. I stared at the door handle. My voice still hung in the silence, like it hadn't finished speaking. I forced myself to move, to test reality. My hand hovered over the latch, trembling. If I pulled it, would I step out into the desert or into the van that was already mine? Before I could decide, the token clattered inside the glove box. Not slid, not rolled, clattered like something had picked it up and dropped it. The spiral sang against the metal, faint but sharp, the sound of steel edges scraping. I lunged forward, yanked the glove box open. Empty. No token. The van lights flickered. In that brief strobe, I saw movement in the rear window, my reflection again, sitting calmly on the bed, hands folded, watching. When the light steadied, the space was empty, but the imprint of weight dented the cushion. I couldn't stay. I shoved the key into ignition, turned. The van coughed, caught. Headlights carved the desert open. The road stretched ahead, a lifeline. I pressed down hard. Tires spun gravel, then gripped. I fled. Mile markers whipped past. 1, 2, 3. My chest loosened. Then another 0. My gut dropped. The highway bent into the same slow arc. The loop. Always the loop. I slammed the wheel left, cutting off pavement, barreling into scrub. The van bucked, suspension groaning. Branches clawed metal. Dust smothered the headlights. Still I drove, desperate for any break in the spiral. Then, suddenly, darkness parted. I skidded to a stop on open ground. Above me, the ridge rose, black against the stars. The inland beam from the corkboard drawing burned across memory. Only now, I saw it in the sky for real, white light cutting sideways, scanning the desert, never touching the horizon. I stumbled out of the van. Night air stabbed cold, full of that wet concrete smell. The light swept over me once. When it passed, I wasn't standing beside the van anymore. I was inside the laundromat, fluorescent buzz overhead, rows of machines churning. My van's reflection gleamed in every glass door, each load a copy, tumbling endlessly. A laugh track swelled, not canned this time, but live, dozens of voices clapping in rhythm. They rose and fell with the machines, synchronized. And through it, one clear voice, mine, but older, rasping, "You found Site 25. You don't leave Site 25. The lights flickered. In their pulse, the spiral appeared again, On the floor, on the machines, stamped into every reflection. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The static thickened, drowning my thoughts. Then silence. Utter silence. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the van. Morning sun slanted through the curtains. The hum was gone. No footsteps, no smell, just quiet. For a breath, I let myself believe I dreamed it. I started the engine. The road out of town stretched clean, straight. The mile markers climbed. 19, 20, 21, normal. Relief swelled so sharp it hurt. But when I glanced at the passenger seat, the brass token lay there, spiral up, and on its surface, words etched deeper than before. The loop doesn't end. It just widens. I kept driving. I don't know if I ever stopped. Epilogue, I should have felt free. The road unwound in front of me like a ribbon, steady, promising distance. Gas stations appeared again, familiar brands, neon flicker, and towns with names I could pronounce without stumbling. Life, or the memory of it, returned mile by mile. But freedom carried a fracture. Every so often, I'd glance at the dash clock and see it tick backward, then right itself. Highway signs bent subtly, letters doubling, sliding. And sometimes, when I closed my eyes to blink, I caught the faint shuffle of footsteps pacing under the van, even at 70 miles an hour. The token rides with me. No matter where I stash it, glove box, drawer, even once flung into a trash bin at a rest stop, it always reappears on the passenger seat by the next morning. Spiral up, waiting. Its words shift with the light, but they always end with the same line. You are already inside. I've stopped fighting the loop. Maybe it widens, like the inscription said. Maybe it's stretched so far I can pretend it's a straight line now. But when the wind slides through my open window, carrying that metallic sweetness, I know the truth. The desert doesn't echo, it remembers, and sooner or later, it will call me back to Site 25.